Chapter 1669. It's time for her to go home, the black-robed man said faintly. His voice was so strange that no one could tell if he was a man or a woman. However, the certainty in his tone were very clear. Bufong's pupils constricted slightly. Does this man mean that you should go home? Do you have a home? Bufong became serious. He carefully looked at the figure wrapped in a black robe. The material of the black robe was very exquisite. Upon closer inspection, one could see that it seemed to be flashing with a faint light. It was an artifact, and not an ordinary one. Bufong could not sense the man's aura, but he could feel an inexplicable sense of horror in Bufong's heart. The cursed goddess is inside, isn't she? The man asked again. He had sensed Yu's aura. The black-robed man no longer paid attention to Bufong. He stepped away from Bufong, the hem of his black robe fluttering in the wind. Then, he stepped into the restaurant. Bufong got up from the recliner and wanted to call out to the man. Rumble. The man crossed the threshold and stepped into the restaurant. A gust of wind suddenly burst out. The man's black robe fluttered even though there was no wind. Swoosh! The hood of the robe was blown off, revealing a face. It was a woman, a graceful middle-aged woman with wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. But her beauty could not be ignored. It was as if she had become the focus of heaven and earth for a moment. The woman was frowning at the moment. As she stepped on the restaurant's floor, she felt a familiar aura coming toward her. She jerked her head around and rested her eyes on Bufong. A majestic pressure suddenly descended, pressing down on Bufong's body like a towering mountain. The woman looked at Bufong with a deep look in her eyes. When Bufong looked in her eyes, she felt as if she could see the stars in the universe. The woman did not ask. She just looked at Bufong and sighed. Then, she shook her head and stepped into the restaurant. His aura immediately calmed down. Bufong was bewildered. Who was this lady? Why did it give him such a horrifying feeling? In this world, who could give him such a horrifying feeling? Even a saint of the Great Path would not scare Bufong. Could it be that this noble woman was a chaotic saint? Bufong opened his mouth and thought for a while. The lady frowned at him and signaled for Bufong to continue. What did you ask before? Is you here? Bufong said. The noble woman nodded. She looked at Bufong indifferently, without any joy or sorrow. You's not here. She went out to play. Bufong thought for a while and said seriously, the noble woman. Where did this retard come from? Did he think she was a fool? The noble woman raised the corner of her mouth coldly. She looked a little like you when you were sneering. Don't be naughty. The noble woman shook her head. Then, she turned and stepped into the restaurant. Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. On the roof, Sun Wukong hung upside down and poked his head out. He blinked, then landed at Bufong's side. Bufong, little friend, don't worry. I'll support you. I'll back you up, he said. The two of them stepped into the restaurant. The noble woman found a chair, sat down, and crossed her legs. Her long, plump legs looked fairer and more beautiful in contrast to her black robe. Another familiar restaurant? When she saw Bufong come in, the corner of the noble woman's mouth twitched again. Bufong nodded, clasped his hands behind his back, and stood to the side. Many years ago, I also took a cursed goddess from a restaurant like this, the noblewoman said. The noblewoman seemed to think of something funny. She chuckled and said, I didn't expect that after so many years, I would once again receive a cursed goddess in a restaurant. Is this fate? The noblewoman said. She glanced at Bufong with a deep look in her eyes. Unfortunately, it's an ill-fated fate. Well, you're not here. She went out to play. Why don't you come back another day? Bufong said in a serious tone. He was serious. The noblewoman in front of him was unfathomable, and Bufong felt that he might not be able to beat her. So, if he could trick her away, it would be best to do so. It's fine. I'll wait for her. She promised me. The noblewoman did not take his words seriously and waved her hand. Suddenly, the noblewoman glanced at the menu with interest. Give me a plate of egg fried rice. If I remember correctly, I also had egg fried rice back then. The noblewoman said, Egg fried rice. Bufong paused. No, the restaurant is closed today. Bufong shook his head and refused. You are much more naughty than the previous chef, the noblewoman chuckled. She was not in a hurry, nor did she rush him. Just like that, she quietly waited in the restaurant. Bufong frowned, choosing to sit down as well. He thought that they were going to fight. However, this kind of quiet atmosphere made him uncomfortable. It was as annoying as old man Rulai chanting scriptures. So, he sneaked out to find trouble with the Kuin Pong. Time passed. The sky gradually turned dark. When the sun completely set, the noblewoman finally opened her mouth. She looked at the second floor and said, "It's time to go." Bufong, who was in a daze, suddenly woke up and turned to look at him. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Yu, who was wearing a black dress, walked out. Yu's face was expressionless. Bufong sat on one side, and the noblewoman sat on the other. Yu walked out. When she saw this scene, she stopped. Just when Bufong thought Nethery would walk toward him, a figure suddenly appeared. Instead, Yu walked toward the noblewoman. The noblewoman was very satisfied. She rose to her feet gently and helped Yu tidy her hair. "Let's go. The queen must have been waiting for a long time. Let's go back." The noblewoman smiled gently. This woman was really beautiful when she smiled. Yu did not smile, and her expression did not even change. "Well, wait a minute. If I may ask, where is Yu's home?" Bufong asked suddenly. Yu had been with him since the Light Wind Empire. How could he let this woman take her away? "Young man, I know what you mean. I've seen many people like you." The noblewoman smiled. She reached out a hand, took Yu's soft hand, and slowly pulled Yu out of the restaurant. Yu struggled for a moment, but in the end, she followed the noblewoman. Bufong frowned. His figure flickered. He stood in front of the restaurant. "Do you know Void City?" The noblewoman asked, looking indifferently at Bufong. Bufong shook his head, indicating that he did not know. Bufong wanted to ask if she knew anything about the Light Wind Empire. Void City is a land of chaos in the universe, but it is also a place full of hope. Shrouded in the light of the Queen of Curses, it is a pure land in the war-torn universe. No one dares to cause trouble in Void City, because no one can withstand the Queen of Curses' curse. Anyone who causes trouble in Void City will turn into a pile of bones, Bufong said with a bitter smile. The noblewoman said. She looked Bufong up and down. "I've seen many chefs like you. Give up the idea in your heart. Chefs like you are, after all, just chefs. Oh, a friendly reminder. You better not step into Void City. The Queen of Curses hates chefs like you the most," the noblewoman said. A moment later, she pulled Nethery's hand and walked forward. The look in Yu's eyes was complicated. Ever since she agreed to the voice in her head and gained power, she knew this day would come. However, he didn't expect this day to come so soon. She wanted to eat a few more bowls of Bufong's dragon blood rice. Although she no longer needed it to replenish her energy essence, she could not forget the taste. However, she still couldn't forget that smell. Perhaps eating a bowl of dragon blood rice every day had become a habit for her. Without this habit, she was really not used to it. The noblewoman walked to the door. Bufong did not step aside. He still looked at her indifferently. According to the lady's description, Void City should be a very awesome place. But what did that have to do with him? You were brought out of the land of Relic by Bufong, all the way from the Light Wind Empire to the present day. How could Bufong let this noblewoman take him away just like that? Why are you chefs so persistent? The noblewoman smiled, but her smile was a little cold. She seemed to know what was going to happen next. Bufong shook his head. "If you don't want to go, you can't take her away." "What if she wants to go?" the noblewoman asked. Her words made Bufong pause. "Well, you can step aside now." The noblewoman sneered. The noblewoman sneered. She had seen this look many times. She raised a hand and gently patted Bufong on the shoulder. Bufong frowned. He raised his Tao-Tai arm. Then, he grabbed the noblewoman's arm. "I said, you can step aside now." Rumble. The noblewoman's voice suddenly became very melodious and magnificent, as if it came from the depths of the universe. At this moment, heaven and earth changed color. The whole earth seemed to fall into a panic. Rumble, Bufong's pupils constricted. He felt a pressure pressing down on him. Rumble, the restaurant rumbled. It was as if a supreme aura was about to fall. The noblewoman glanced warily at the restaurant. However, she seemed to be very experienced. As if teleporting, she pulled Bufang out of the restaurant. Rumble. The whole Kunlun immortal mountain began to shake at this moment. In the immortal palace, the Queen Mother of the West and many immortals were horrified. They felt a terrible aura pressing down on them, making them unable to move. A chaotic saint, the Queen Mother of the West, lay motionless on the table, and many immortals were also stiff. How could a chaotic saint appear on the ancestral planet? What happened? On the immortal island of Penglai, Tong Tian opened his eyes, and his aura fluctuated. The seawater seemed to be suppressed by this aura. Not even the slightest ripple could be seen. Fellow Taoist Bufang, the sect leader, frowned. In front of Bubu Little Restaurant, the ground under Bufang's feet caved in and turned into a deep pit. The rubble was instantly turned into powder. The aura made Bufang's vermilion robe seem to break at this moment. This noblewoman was actually a chaotic saint. How could the so-called Void City be so terrifying? How could it let a chaotic saint take you away? Bufang grabbed the noblewoman's arm and did not let go. The energy of yin and yang swirled around the Taotai arm, and the roar of a Taotai rang out. The shadow of a Taotai emerged over Bufang's arm. It was also suppressed by an 8 trigrams array. Although I don't know why every cursed goddess has a chef by her side, whether it's a coincidence or the will of heaven, the cursed goddesses will eventually return to Void City, and you chefs will never be able to step into the city. Rumble, the noblewoman said. The next moment, a ghostly green cursed snake slowly slithered out of her arm and coiled around Bufang's arm. Slash! The cursed snake bit Bufang's arm. Chapter 1670. After being bitten by the cursed snake, there seemed to be a dark aura seeping into it. Bufang furrowed his brows and snorted. You, who was being pulled by the noblewoman, narrowed her eyes and yanked the noblewoman. The noblewoman glanced at you, and the cursed snake disappeared. You poor compassion. When you return to Void City, you will understand how disgusting these chefs are, the noblewoman said indifferently. She glanced at Bufang and curled her lips coldly. Take one last look at this chef. The soul demon and soul god are about to wake up, and the first thing they will do when they do is kill this chef. So, this might be the last time you see each other. The noblewoman withdrew her hand and said to you. You bit her lips, and her eyes were throbbing. She didn't listen to the lady and just looked at Bufang with a complicated gaze. Bufang, give me another bowl of dragon blood rice. Bufang felt that his Taotai arm was a little numb after being bitten by the cursed snake. It was as if an invisible energy had seeped into it. However, Bufang didn't reject you. He had already prepared the dragon blood rice. He flipped his hand. He took out a bowl from the system dimensional bag and handed it to you. He had stored many portions of dragon blood rice in the system's dimensional bag in case of emergencies. You took the rice and ate it quietly. The noblewoman wasn't in a hurry. She just watched as you ate. She had plenty of time. In fact, at her level of strength, she had no concept of time. You ate very quickly. Before long, the bowl of dragon blood rice was empty. It's delicious as always. You feel that no matter how much you eat this dragon blood rice, you won't get sick of it. After fusing with the power of the female corpse, many memories had appeared in her mind. Now that these memories had returned, she understood her origins. She came from Void City, the hometown of the cursed goddesses. Every generation of cursed goddesses had their memories sealed by the Queen of Curses and were banished to different places. If any of the cursed goddesses awakened their memories, they would regain the recognition of Void City and could return to Void City as a candidate for the Queen of Curses. She could not refuse the lady's request to return. When she promised the realm lord the power of Void City, she had decided her fate. The lady in front of him was the guide of Void City and a top expert there. She was once a cursed goddess, and now she was one of the guardians of Void City, a top expert with the cultivation base of a chaotic saint. Of course, that's all you know. She'll only know more secrets when she returns to Void City. Perhaps now was the time for her to part ways with Bufang. Unfortunately, from now on, you might not be able to eat Bufang's food anymore. Inexplicably, you felt a little depressed. "Let's go," the noblewoman said. You nodded. Bufong frowned. He wanted to stop her, but the lady raised a finger. A vast amount of chaotic energy spread, and the void seemed to be collapsing. The world changed dramatically in an instant. The distance between Bufong, you, and the noblewoman was pulled infinitely far. It was as if they were so close together. Chefs are not welcome in Void City. This is because the Queen of Curses hates them. Of course, if you are strong enough to gain the Queen's approval, you can come to Void City, but that is basically impossible. "You are too weak," the noblewoman said. She smiled faintly. Then she smiled faintly. She pulled you and slowly turned around. Bufong frowned. Everything in front of him shrank in an instant. It had turned into a small dot. In the end, that small dot suddenly disappeared. Everything disappeared without a trace. The terrible aura of a chaotic saint was gone as well. Bufong stood where he was. The setting sun had completely disappeared, and the little bit of red was devoured by the darkness. Dazzling stars sprinkled down from the sky, emanating dazzling and resplendent radiance. Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. There was no sadness or joy in his heart. You had left. As the noblewoman had said, he was still too weak now, and he did not even have the qualification to make her stay. From a noblewoman's words, Bufong understood a lot. The noblewoman had seen many chefs like him, and she was also very afraid of restaurants. Perhaps what made her afraid was the system. Could the chef she'd seen be my previous host? My host, Void City, and the Soul Demon. There's an inexplicable connection between these three. Bufong looked up. He looked up at the sky. Sun Wukong, Yang Jian, and the celestial dog were watching Bufong from a distance and did not come over to disturb him. At this moment, they should know that Bufong needed to think about life. Bufong's eyes were empty as he stared at the boundless stars. The artifact spirit's sighs rang out in his spirit sea. Host, stick to the path of becoming the god of cooking. There are many things and many mysteries that you can only see clearly when you stand at the top. Believe in yourself. You are the best. The system's serious voice rang out in Bufong's head. Bufong paused. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. It had been a long time since the system had given him chicken soup. However, the system was right. As long as he stood at the top and became the god of cooking, perhaps he would be able to see through all the mysteries that had been shrouding him. He turned and went back into the restaurant. With a creak, the restaurant's door closed. The aura of a chaotic saint was gone. This made many immortals and deities breathe sighs of relief. If a chaotic saint wanted to destroy the ancestral planet, it would be very difficult to stop him. It would be a nightmare for everyone. In the following days, the ancestral planet returned to peace. The immortals hid in the mountains and did not enter the mortal world. In the cities, however, the superhumans began to develop rapidly. The birth of the cultivation system rekindled the enthusiasm and desire of the people on the ancestral planet for cultivation. Yang Jian left with the celestial dog. After eating Bufong's food for a few days, Yang Jian had to return to the immortal island of Penglai. Tong Tian summoned him back, and many immortals and deities returned to the primitive universe to fight the soul demons. As a divine general of the celestial court, Yang Jian naturally had to participate in the war. Bufong did not ask them to stay, and there was no need for them to do so. His restaurant had always been like this. People came and people left, and Bufong was used to it. Sun Wukong also left. Although he was reluctant to leave, he could not stay in Bufong's restaurant to eat and drink. His task of returning to the ancestral planet had been completed, and it was time for him to return to the primitive universe to fight the soul demons. Besides, he had eaten so many of Bufong's dishes and eaten a lot of soul overlord meat while following Bufong. Both his comprehension and cultivation base had reached a bottleneck. He needed an opportunity to break through. This opportunity could not be found on the peaceful earth under the watch of the three emperors. So he returned to the primitive universe. For a moment, Bufong was the only one left in Bubu Little Restaurant. Oh, there was also the Empyrean Fairy. The Empyrean Fairy was very obedient now. Although you had left, she was still Bufong's maid. Of course, Bufong's expressionless face these days had put a lot of pressure on her. One day, Bufong closed the door of the restaurant. He left the restaurant alone. Then, he returned to Jiangdong and walked around the city. He looked back at the road he had walked. The ancestral planet was thriving now. Everyone was cultivating hard. The pressure brought by the soul demons made them deeply understand the importance of cultivation. Bufong walked on the ancestral planet. He was not in a hurry. In the base of the superhumans in Jiangdong, Xiao AI stretched and walked out of the base to bask in the sun, which was rare for her. Earth was much more peaceful now. The foreign gods had also settled down a lot. Perhaps it was because the superhumans were getting stronger and stronger. But in fact, it had something to do with Bufong's soul overlord meat. Hua had benefited a lot from the soul overlord meat sold by Bufong. Every piece of soul overlord meat had created a top existence. These existences had kept Hua safe and secure. Xiao AI is now an A-class paranormal. Although it was a shame that she was only an A-class superhuman after following Bufong for so long, her talent was limited. Suddenly, Xiao AI, who was stretching, froze. She seemed to see a familiar figure in the distance. Senior? Xiao AI seemed a little uncertain. Her figure shot out rapidly and arrived at the dense forest. However, he discovered that there was no longer anyone in the forest. She was sure that the figure she saw just now was Bufong. However, Bufong did not want her to see it, so she could not see it. There was an egg on the ground. The egg was emitting a golden brilliance, as if there was divinity flowing in it. What is this? Xiao AI picked up the egg. The energy in the egg made her feel refreshed. There was no doubt that this was left by Bufong, but she was very puzzled. Why did Senior leave such an egg? What was this egg? In fact, this egg was a gift from the Heaven Tree to Bufong. It was a dragon egg. Now, Bufong had left it on Earth. It could be considered as leaving some footprints on Earth. Bufong walked in the city. His divine sense kept scanning. His spiritual consciousness swept out, but basically no one could sense it. In the following days, Bufong stayed on Earth for a month. During this month, Bufong traveled to the ends of the Earth. A month later, Bufong returned to Mount Kunlun. He was still in the little restaurant in Kunlun Immortal Mountain. As for when Bufong would return to continue his business, that would depend on fate. On this day, Bufong finally decided to return. The artifact spirits had completely recovered, and Bufong's task of returning to Earth was completed. Moreover, he had experienced many things. Of course, these things had also made Bufong grow. His state of mind and mentality had undergone a transformation which was hard to describe. He understood the horror of the soul demons, learned about higher levels, made many friends, felt the spirit of the three emperors, and learned about the primitive universe. I'm sure Bufong will go to Void City. Bufong swore in his heart. Doesn't the queen of Void City hate chefs? Bufong said that he would open a branch in Void City and cook under the queen's nose every day. He liked it when people hated him but could not kill him. Before he returned, Bufong entered the Heaven and Earth farmland. The Heaven and Earth farmland was as lively as ever. Now, it had turned into a vast, great world. Of course, there were no humans in this great world. Neo Hansen's wooden house was built in the center of the farmland. He lived a leisurely and contented life in this world like a fish in water. The Heaven Tree stood as straight as the vault of heaven, looking more and more mystical. The 9 Revolution Great Path Tea Tree was also shrouded in a layer of mist, as if shrouded in the aura of the Great Path. The senseless lotus on the Heaven Tree was beautiful and enchanting. Bufong walked quietly among them. Neo Hansen did not know that Bufong had come. He was still lying in his chair, snoring loudly. After leaving the Heaven and Earth farmland, Bufong sat on a chair in Bibu Little Restaurant. There was a plate of dishes and a jar of wine on the table. Bufong sipped the wine and ate the dishes. The Empyrean fairy stood respectfully in the distance, glancing at Bufong from time to time. She felt that Bufong had become more and more terrifying and unfathomable. The wine in the jar was finished. Bufong focused his eyes. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. His mind flickered. The system's serious voice rang out in Bufong's mind. Chapter 1671. Attention, host. The return teleportation has begun. The system's serious voice lingered in Bufong's ears. Bufong sat in a chair and drank all the tea in his cup. Smacking his lips, he stood up. Soon, the white specks of light filled the whole restaurant. The next moment, the teleportation array emerged and enveloped Bufong. Inside the restaurant, it was as bright as day, extremely resplendent. Soon, the light disappeared. The Empyrean fairy stood in the restaurant, watching Bufong leave with a complicated look in her eyes. She sighed softly. There was no doubt that Bufong had left the ancestral planet. As for where he had gone, she did not know. Of course, she did not need to know. Her duty was to look after the restaurant. Perhaps one day, Bufong would return. In any case, for the Empyrean fairy, she would stay in Mount Kunlun for the rest of her life. As for looking after the restaurant, it was just a piece of cake for her. Rumble, the world shook. Surrounded by the white specks of light, Bufong felt that everything was flowing and everything became so clear. Everything around him was passing rapidly, as if he had traveled through the river of time and space. The stars swayed in front of his eyes. In the chaotic universe, in the territory of the Xiai divine dynasty, a beam of white light fell from the sky and smashed hard on the star. The whole star rumbled as if it was about to explode. Smoke and dust billowed, accompanied by lightning arcs. From within, a thin figure slowly walked out. Bufong clasped his hands behind his back. His vermilion robe fluttered, keeping the smoke and dust away from him. The system is acting up again. It's getting the wrong landing target again. Bufong twitched his mouth. He was used to the system acting up from time to time. It would often get the wrong landing target. This had been the case since he was in the Light Wind Empire. Standing on the star, Bufong glanced around. It was a dead star without any aura of life, and there was only withered dust on it. Standing on the star, Bufong looked up at the universe. In the pitch-black universe, densely packed stars were circulating, and most of them were lifeless. He sat down cross-legged on the star and pondered for a while. Then, Bufong began to walk on this lifeless planet. Dust flew everywhere. Bufong watched it slowly. The dust that had accumulated for countless years was extremely thick. On the star, volcanoes erupted and magma surged. It was a primal scene that shocked people's hearts. Every living star had evolved from such a dead star. The difficulty involved was not as simple as splitting the heavens and earth apart. That was why life was so precious. Boom! Bufong's divine sense spread out. After returning to the Chaos Verse, Bufong spread out his psychic power, instantly covering an area of trillions of kilometers. His current cultivation base stood at the very peak of the Chaos Verse, and he was incomparably powerful. With a single thought, he traversed countless regions. Bufong had locked onto the Xiai divine dynasty's capital. He took a step. The void tore open. After returning to the Chaos Verse, he could use the supreme laws of the universe he had comprehended again. He had to admit that the benefit of the laws was that they made it much more convenient for him to travel. With just one step, he shortened the distance by countless miles. Tens of thousands of stars flew by rapidly. Outside the Xiai divine dynasty's continent, Bufong hovered in the starry sky. After being away from the Xiai divine dynasty for so long, it still had not changed much. Bufong landed. It was quiet. The Soul Demon riot had been over for a long time. Although there were still some soul demons operating in the divine dynasty, the Xiai divine emperor would not easily let them continue to cause trouble. The Xiai divine dynasty's capital was as lively as ever. People were coming and going, and heads were moving. All kinds of gorgeous warships were speeding by. Inside the warship, there were people playing around. On both sides of the streets, all kinds of stalls were open, and the peddlers' cries and shouts filled the entire capital. Row upon row of high-rise buildings were like pillars that rose into the sky. Bufong was walking. No one recognized him. Soon, he came to the Luo family's skyscraper, stepped into the teleportation array, and was teleported straight to the top floor. Bufong was very familiar with everything here. A ding rang out. The teleportation array had reached the top floor. Bufong walked out of it, facing the restaurant. However, the restaurant was closed now, and it was not as lively as he had imagined. Bufong opened the door. It was a little dark inside. However, as soon as Bufong stepped in, the whole restaurant lit up. Sanyang, look, why are the lights on the top floor of the skyscraper on? A rich girl in the capital took her hand and pointed at the top floor of the Luo family skyscraper. Now that the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty was undergoing a major construction project, the Luo family skyscraper, which used to be the tallest building in the capital, had been surpassed by many other buildings. It was no longer as magnificent as it used to be. It was even more dilapidated and old than some other buildings. It no longer looked as high-spirited as it used to be. The rich girl pulled Luo Sanyang's arm. However, she found that Luo Sanyang was motionless beside her. She looked up at the top floor of the skyscraper in disbelief. The top floor was a restaurant. The lights in the restaurant were on. That meant that man. He was back. Luo Sanyang said a few words to her best friend, then eagerly flew toward the restaurant. That man was finally back. When she reached the top floor of the skyscraper, she stopped in front of the door. In front of the restaurant, each of them pulled a recliner and lay there quietly with their eyes closed, taking a leisurely nap. A familiar figure, a familiar style. It was indeed Bufong. Owner Bu, Luo Sanyang called out cautiously. Bufong paused. He opened his eyes, greeted Luo Sanyang, and then went back to lying down. Luo Sanyang did not know whether to laugh or cry. It was really Bufong. Owner Bu had returned. After greeting Bufong, Luo Sanyang turned and left. Soon, the news spread throughout the Divine Dynasty's capital. The whole Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty was shaken. However, when many people wanted to visit, they were all driven away by Bufong with a wave of his hand. Bufong did nothing but lay in the recliner and slept for 3 days and 3 nights. After a good night's sleep, he sat up in the chair and stretched his body. The blazing sun leaped out of the many skyscrapers, illuminating the land with its brilliant light. Bufong returned to the restaurant and walked slowly with his hands clasped behind his back. No one knew where Hades' era had gone. The Lord Go had also disappeared. The path understanding tree stood there, its branches flourishing with leaves. With a clanging sound, Xiaobai slowly walked out and followed behind Bufong. Little Hu and Xiaopi, who were lying on Bufong's shoulders, jumped and landed on Xiaobai. Xiaopi coiled up and lay on Xiaobai's head, while Little Hu jumped up and down on Xiaobai's body. Bufong glanced at Xiaobai, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. He walked up to Xiaobai and patted Xiaobai's belly. They're all gone. Only the 2 of us and these little fellows are left, Bufong said with some emotion. The Lord Go is gone. You are gone. And I don't know where Hades' era has gone. Bufong suddenly found that the people around him seemed to have disappeared. Only Xiaobai was still with him. Xiaobai was a product of the system, so he would not leave. Inexplicably, Bufong felt a little lonely. He adjusted his state of mind. Then, Bufong opened the restaurant's door. The restaurant continued to operate. The Divine Emperor, the Crown Prince, the heads of the various aristocratic families, as well as people familiar with him, all came to greet Bufong. They were as respectful to Bufong as ever. The man who saved their world from the disaster of the soul demons was definitely worthy of their respect and memory. The Divine Emperor was old and kindly, and they talked for a long time. After years of development, the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty and the Titan Divine Dynasty had also recovered some of their strength. Now, Bufong had returned. The leaders of the 2 Divine Dynasties also came to the restaurant. The leaders of the 3 Divine Dynasties had gathered in a small restaurant. This was a very exaggerated number for the entire chaotic universe. Many buildings in the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty's capital had restaurants. These restaurants never thought that the reopening of a restaurant that had been closed for many years would have such a great impact on them. The line stretched from the top of the building to the city gate. Countless people were waiting to taste the restaurant's dishes. It was amazing that the restaurant could do this. The other restaurants were deserted. Even the restaurants that were very popular in the capital had lost their competitiveness. It was worth noting that the restaurant had hired a Heaven Divine chef to oversee it. However, their Heaven Divine chef gave up his job in the kitchen and went to line up in front of the restaurant just to taste the food. This frustrated the people who invested in the restaurant. Everyone was sent away. The business was over. Bufong closed the restaurant. Wiping the water off his hands, Bufong made himself a cup of hot tea, sat in the restaurant, and sipped it. The tea was full of a mysterious aura. Naturally, it was not an ordinary tea leaf. It was the 9-revolution Great Path tea. Where had the Lord Go gone? Bufong did not know, and neither did anyone in the Divine Dynasty. He had wanted to find the Lord Go and ask him about the heaven gods. In the chaotic universe, heaven gods were equivalent to saints of the Great Path or chaotic saints. They were very strong. However, Bufong did not know much about heaven gods, except for the one who had slapped him in the lightning tribulation. Bufong was a vengeful man, and he had always kept that in mind. He would get it back when he had the chance. Where were the heaven gods of the chaotic universe? Was the Lord Go a reincarnated heaven god? Were the other heaven gods reincarnated like the Lord Go? Bufong was puzzled. If he wanted to become the god of cooking, he had to cross the hurdle of becoming a heaven god. However, there was nothing Bufong could do even if he thought too much. He could only keep the restaurant open now. Then, Bufong cooked the soul overlord meat and began to sell it. The Shai Divine Dynasty went crazy once again. How could they not know about the soul overlord meat? Back then, Soul 13 had almost destroyed the Shai Divine Dynasty. He was their nightmare, a nightmare they had never seen before. So everyone went crazy. The queues became crazier and crazier. Everyone was scrambling to buy the soul overlord meat. Sales were skyrocketing. Time passed little by little. When Bufong sold all the soul overlord meat, Bufong finally heard the voice he had been waiting for. Ding! Congratulations to the host on completing the system's turnover task and obtaining the qualification to advance. The system's serious voice rang in Bufong's ears, making Bufong's eyes light up in an instant. However, the system's next sentence made Bufong feel somewhat stunned. Chapter 1672. The system's serious voice rang in Bufong's ears. However, it was different from before. The system's voice had become a little vague. What's going on? Bufong furrowed his brows. System, are you short-circuiting? Bufong couldn't help but ask the system in his mind. Rumble, Bufong's spirit C also underwent great changes. Terrible rumbling sounds kept ringing out like the roar of mountains and the roar of tsunamis. All the artifact spirits were tossing and turning inside. This strange phenomenon made Bufong feel a little strange. There hadn't been so many problems before. With a thought, Bufong's figure sank into the spirit sea in an instant. The vast spirit sea, which seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see, was now surging with huge waves. The artifact spirits were tossing and turning inside. The Qilin stood in the center of the spirit sea, opening its mouth and roaring. The seawater formed by the spirit sea kept churning. The gold dragon twisted its body. The vermilion bird flapped its wings and cried. The white tiger roared and kept jumping. The black turtle also slowly floated up from the spirit sea. What was going on? Bufong was confused. What were the artifact spirits doing? Were they dancing in a square? Suddenly, Bufong raised his head and looked up. There, the pages of the God of Cooking's menu kept turning. The true form of the divine sense, sitting cross-legged on it, opened its eyes, which were like the God of Cooking's eye, scanning the menu. The data in the menu kept pouring into its eyes. Bufong calmed down and watched quietly. He wanted to see what was going to happen, Bam. Suddenly, an explosion rang out. Bufong found that his spirit sea was slowly collapsing. Oh! The true form of the divine sense collapsed in an instant and kept scattering. The God of Cooking's menu was crushed to pieces. Then the cracks spread and gradually moved downward. Inch by inch, the spirit sea broke. The world fell silent. Rumble, Bufong felt his vision go dark, and soon he fell into a deep sleep. He didn't know anything. Before falling asleep, he could only hear the system's solemn and serious voice ringing. System upgrade commencing. Bufong didn't know how long he had slept. He only knew that when he opened his eyes, he felt dizzy. It was as if he had caught a bad cold. However, this feeling shouldn't have appeared on him. Bufong had almost forgotten how long it had been since he had been sick. With a thought, Zhang Xian tried to use his spiritual sense. However, he found that his body was so heavy that he couldn't move at all. He couldn't even move a finger, and his spirit seemed to have fallen into a state of dead silence. There wasn't even the slightest mental fluctuation. There was no response from the artifact spirit or the divine sense entity. What was going on? Bufong was dumbfounded. He had spent so much effort to return to Earth and gather the sleeping artifact spirits. What was the result? But when he returned, all the artifact spirits had disappeared. Wasn't this a joke? All his previous efforts were in vain? What about the initiator of all this, the system? Bufong struggled to get up. He leaned back in his chair. The sky was dark. At this moment, lying in front of the restaurant, it seemed that no one had sensed him. Little Hu and Xiaopi were lying on his belly, staring at him with wide eyes. Xiaobai was in the distance, its mechanical eyes flashing. Bufong's mind was in a mess at the moment, and he needed to sort it out. He called the system, but found that it didn't answer him at all. Bufong sensed his power. He could still use the power in his body, which was still at the level of a god emperor. But he couldn't use his spiritual sense at all. It was as if his spiritual sense had been completely erased. Bufong frowned. If he remembered correctly, he should have completed the turnover set by the system and was about to advance. Bufong knew very well how difficult it was to achieve the turnover this time. He had sold almost an entire soul overlord meat to get the turnover. But what was the result? It all seemed like a dream. It was dawn. The sun was jumping up from the outside. Like the morning star, it was blooming with the ultimate brilliance. Outside the restaurant, a dense crowd of people rushed into the restaurant, striving to be the first to enter. Bufong was in a daze. Without his spiritual sense, could he still cook delicious food? So, should he choose to close down the restaurant? Bufong's expression didn't change as he breathed out a sigh of relief. Bufong didn't care about the disappearance of his spiritual sense for the time being. He chose to open the restaurant because he also wanted to verify a fact. Bufong stepped into the kitchen. The crown prince had appeared and was in charge of the restaurant's order. Xiaopi also seemed to feel that there was something wrong with Bufong's state. He looked at Bufong's back as he entered the restaurant in confusion. However, he didn't care about it and started the day's business. Little Hu and Xiaopi were leaning on the counter. They looked at Bufong's back as he entered the kitchen, then at the crowd of people, whose faces were almost filled with fanaticism. These two little fellows weren't completely clueless. At their level, they could understand human nature. There was a look of worry in Little Hu and Xiaopi's eyes. Crown Prince, give me a plate of red braised pork. I like Owner Boo's red braised pork. It's delicious and chewy. A head of an aristocratic family stepped into the restaurant and said to Xiaopi with a smile. Xiaopi nodded and wrote down the menu. Then, he wrote down the menu for several people and gave it to Bufong. Got it. Bufong's calm voice came from the window. Xiaopi did not suspect anything, so he turned around and continued to serve the customers. You are not here now, so he had to do all the work himself. In fact, he had asked Bufong why you were no longer here. However, Bufong didn't say that he had also noticed something unusual, so he didn't continue to ask. The cursed goddesses had a special identity, and many ancient books in the Imperial Library had recorded them. Sizzle. Everything in the restaurant was very harmonious. A few diners even gathered at a table, chatting and laughing as they discussed the delicacies of the dishes. They were also talking about the major events that had happened in the Divine Dynasty. Xiaopi walked to the window and came out with a bowl of red braised pork. The red braised pork looked perfect, sparkling, and translucent. However, when he looked at the dish, he was a little stunned. This was because he found that Bufong's dishes today seemed to be lacking in quality. They were not as lively as before. However, he didn't know much about cooking. He just shook his head. Carrying the red braised pork, he came to the head of the aristocratic family. He placed the dish on the table. "Your red braised pork. Please enjoy," Xiai said. The head hurriedly put his palms together and thanked him. Xiai nodded and went back to his work. Everyone, I'm sorry, but my dish is here first. I'll have a taste first." A smile appeared on the head of the aristocratic family's face. He would come to Bufang's restaurant every day to eat a serving of red braised pork. Of course, sometimes he didn't get in line because he came late. He hadn't eaten red braised pork for several days. Under the envious gazes of the people around him, the head of the aristocratic family grabbed his chopsticks, picked up a piece of crystal red braised pork, and stuffed it into his mouth. Munch, munch. The head of the aristocratic family had a look of enjoyment on his face. However, after chewing a few times, the man's expression immediately changed. He furrowed his brows, and the enjoyment suddenly disappeared. He chewed again. He wanted to taste the taste in his memory, but no matter how hard he ate, he couldn't find it. The head of the aristocratic family put down his chopsticks. There were still many pieces of red braised pork on his plate. He frowned, and his face was a little ugly. The others also noticed his abnormality. "What's wrong, old shun? Is the food not to your taste?" "That can't be. Every dish of owner booze is very delicious. Are you sick?" His friends around him were kind enough to ask. The head of the aristocratic family frowned and shook his head. "No, today's red braised pork is a little strange. Although it's not difficult to eat, it's much worse than the previous red braised pork." As soon as he said that, the people around him thought he was joking. No one took it seriously. At this time, the other people's dishes were also served. They didn't take the words of the head of the aristocratic family seriously at all. They all started to eat. However, soon, everyone who had a taste of the dish suddenly froze. This taste isn't right. The fishy smell hasn't been completely removed. What's going on?" The diners spoke one after another. They frowned and were somewhat dissatisfied with the dishes. Bufang's dishes had never disappointed them. However, on this day, they were indeed disappointed. It was as if the chef of the dishes had changed overnight. There was no spirituality in the dishes at all. In the kitchen, Bufang also walked out. He furrowed his brows. He had also realized the seriousness of the problem. Without his divine sense, Bufang felt that the foundation he had always relied on for cooking seemed to be unusable. Bufang walked in front of the head of the aristocratic family, grabbed a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks, and put it in his mouth. This was red braised pork cooked with top-grade spirit beasts. It could definitely be eaten. However, Bufang's face became very unsightly. This was the dish he had cooked. How could this be? Bufang took a deep breath. He felt the seriousness of the matter. That mouthful of red braised pork had lost all spirituality. With just one bite, a greasy feeling completely poured into his body and mind, making him feel uncomfortable all over. It wasn't that it wasn't delicious, but compared to the dishes Bufang had cooked before, it was really terrible. The disappearance of his divine sense had a huge impact on Bufang's cooking. "Today's business is over. Temporarily closed," Bufang said seriously. He didn't choose to continue cooking. Many diners also left, shaking their heads in disappointment. They didn't know what had happened to Bufang. However, they were very disappointed with today's meal. After these diners left the restaurant, the news spread like wildfire. In a flash, it had spread all over the capital. Many people couldn't believe it. After all, to them, Bufang's dishes were their faith. However, now, their faith had collapsed. The restaurants and the surrounding buildings were very happy. They were all ready to go out of business. But what happened? They came back from the dead. That restaurant, which could never make a mistake, made a mistake. And now, this mistake was their chance. After learning the news, Luo Sanyang hurried to Bufang's restaurant. The restaurant's door was closed. The crown prince, Xia Yi, sat in a chair, looking at Bufang seriously. This matter was very serious. Bufang's cooking was the key to supporting the whole restaurant. And now, there was a problem with Bufang's cooking. This was a very serious problem. Bufang sat in a chair deep in thought. This matter had a huge impact on him. He didn't believe it, so he cooked for 4 hours in the kitchen. He cooked every dish, and tasted it himself after he was done. However, when he tasted it, it was hard to swallow. It had completely lost its previous spirituality and taste. Why was that? This change must have something to do with the system and the mutation in his spirit sea. Swish, Bufong reached out a porcelain spoon and scooped up a spoonful of egg-fried rice. Xia, Luo, Sanyang, and the others also ate together. As soon as the egg-fried rice entered their mouths, their faces changed. Xia even spat out the egg-fried rice in his mouth. It was too salty. There was really a problem with Bufong's cooking. He couldn't even cook the egg-fried rice that he was best at. Bufong was in a trance. It seemed that the disappearance of his mental force had a huge impact on his cooking skills. Where had his spirit sea gone? Chapter 1673. Inside the warship, Bufong was also trying to cook. If he still had his mental force, he could find it in an instant as long as he spread it out. Finally, the void was torn apart. Do you know where Mu Hongzi is? The latter walked out of the thatched hut and looked at Bufong with a smile. The warship's shape became blurry. The artifact spirits had told Bufong about it a long time ago. Bufong paused. When the speed of the warship slowed down, the warship stopped moving. However, Bufong was not that kind of person, and Bufong did have a candidate in mind to solve his doubts. Sitting in a chair, Bufong could see everything, but he could clearly feel that his perception of the outside world was slowly disappearing. The heaven tree was flourishing and rushing into the stars. The warship was sailing in the boundless starry sky. The restaurant on the top floor of the Luo family skyscraper had become sparsely populated. Ignorance is bliss. Bufong would not kill these people. It was a continent floating in the starry sky. He had a goal. If he wanted to find out the doubts in his heart, he had to find someone to solve them. Bufong even felt a little regretful. He could still cook because he could judge the heat control of the dish, the addition of ingredients, and so on through experience. Since when did the Netherworld have these warships? The dishes cooked in this way were extremely delicious. Why? An intruder? However, without his mental force, it would be a little difficult for him to find Mu Hongzi. How dare you? How dare you call a world king by his name? Men, let's catch the intruder. Many things seemed to have disappeared, but at the same time, they did not. Who are you? Hurry up and surrender. Bufong clasped his hands behind his back, his face expressionless. It was late at night. It seemed that the Netherworld had been developing well over the years. Mu Hongzi had indeed done his best for the Netherworld. The position of the Heaven Chief realm was completely different from before Bufong left. His cooking skills had gone wrong, and his spirit sea could not sense him or use his mental force. For Bufong, this was really a thunderous blow. Bufong thought a lot. Then Bufong strode out of the restaurant. It was like switching from a car to a bicycle. The drop in cooking skills was not just a little. On the contrary, Xiachen wasn't that surprised by Bufong's arrival. Previously, when Bufong was in a trance, he even made the egg-fried rice too salty. Summer? He stared at Bufong in high spirits, even a little excited. Before Bufong left, a demigod was the peak of the Netherworld. With Bufong's realm, he could naturally see that the Heaven Tree was incompatible with the Heaven Chief realm. Later, Bufong started to feel that there was a problem with his sensitivity to ingredients. A melodious song came from the thatched hut. The song made Xia's face turn a little black. In a trance, Bufong thought about a lot of things. Bufong rubbed the two little fellows' heads. He was very open-minded. There was a little fear in his eyes. After all, the warship Bufong was piloting was much more advanced than theirs. The warship slowly left the Xia Divine Dynasty's imperial palace and sped toward the boundless starry sky. He could still summon the god of cooking sets, but his spirit sea seemed to be blinded. Suddenly, the sound of something piercing through the air rang out. Then, he turned his eyes to the boundless great Netherworld. Bufong paused for a moment. The Xia Divine Emperor comforted Bufong for a long time and talked with Bufong in the imperial palace for a long time. Bufong saw a familiar scene. Although Bufong had lost his cooking skills, Buffon's cultivation base was still at the top of this world. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly as he shook his head. Before him, there were many other hosts, but all of them failed in the end. For other restaurants, this was a joyous occasion. Today's nether prison was well governed, and it was developing very fast. When the Heaven Chief realm and Buffon left, it had changed a lot. What the hell? Before this, many hosts should have failed at this stage. When the Shy Divine Emperor learned of Buffon's arrival, he hurried out of the imperial palace. The moment Buffon stepped into the Heaven Chief realm, however, Buffon did not feel sorry for himself. As a chef, he felt like he had been thrown into hell when these things were taken away from him. Of course, Buffon didn't collapse, but he felt a little unwilling in his heart. He walked on the street at a steady pace. Buffon steered the warship and continued to speed forward. There was something wrong with Buffon's cooking skills, and there was someone in the great netherworld who could help him solve his problems. Rumble, when Summer and Buffon arrived, he was back. The two of them walked in the Heaven Chief realm. The Heaven Chief realm had now become the holy land of the great netherworld. The young man frowned. If that was the choice, it would be meaningless. He sat in the warship. Soon, Buffon came to the Heaven Chief realm. However, for Buffon, the bright starry sky was somewhat beautiful. Smoke and smoke billowed, and all kinds of noises could be heard. Little Hu and Xiaopi jumped onto his shoulders and looked at him with their big eyes. He could still taste the dishes he had just cooked. The fluctuation of the law of space spread. However, the prosperity of the Heaven Chief realm was beyond Buffon's expectation. As Buffon broke into the territory of the great netherworld, Buffon walked out of it. Then, he shook his head helplessly. It seemed that he had been away from the netherworld for too long, and many people had forgotten him. This piqued Buffon's interest. It had been a long time since he left the great netherworld. However, Buffon grew up here, so he naturally would not forget the great netherworld. Boom! Boom! Instead, he watched. He took a step forward. It's okay. Temporary confusion is a good thing for me. Just like a phoenix's nirvana, there must be a low tide. The two of them came to the top of the heaven tree. Buffon's figure suddenly appeared. Buffon shook his head and was too lazy to say anything to him. Summer said, "In the capital of the divine dynasty, neon lights were flashing, and the lights were shining brightly." The next moment, a figure he never expected to see appeared in front of him. Although he was just a little saint, in this warship, even the 9 Revolution great sage did not dare to attack him. A young man came out. Buffon could not even cook the simplest egg fried rice now. The road to the starry sky was endless. In Nether Prison, Buffon was a little unwilling. It was a young man whose cultivation base was at the level of a 9 Revolution little saint. Perhaps it would affect his cooking skills. Then, the path to becoming a god of cooking was not that easy. Since he obtained the system, Buffon's cooking basically revolved around it. The warships no longer held back. Energy bombs gathered and shot toward Buffon, intending to blow Buffon to pieces. The next moment, Buffon disappeared from where he was. Finally, after a long time, this was the source of his confidence. At most, they would go to another restaurant and continue eating. However, his pride was quickly torn to shreds. The energy bombs with such power were naturally extraordinary. This was what Buffon learned after asking around. It is said that in the Heaven Chief realm, many geniuses have broken through the shackles of the great sage and become gods. Buffon left the Shy Divine Dynasty. Buffon borrowed a warship from the Shy Divine Emperor and left. Of course, the taste might not be as good as before. It was the latest weapon developed by the Netherworld. In the great Netherworld buzz. However, most people did not have much of a change in their attitudes. Buffon said, "What a troublemaker." Mu Hongxi's face, which was as beautiful as a woman's, came into Buffon's eyes. However, perhaps because he was used to using his mental force, Buffon was not used to it now that it had disappeared. A wisp of divine sense shrouded him. Realm King? His Excellency never stays in Nether Prison. Was this the system's doing? His cooking skills would always be at the same level as before, unable to improve. He could taste the food with his tongue, but he could not even taste it. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. Bu Fong frowned, feeling a little speechless. If he had not chosen to advance before, none of this would have happened. His cooking skills were still as exquisite as ever. In the Luo family skyscraper, Luo Sanyang looked up at the warship that sped past. She seemed to be in a trance. Tisk TSK. Long time no see, Lil Boo Boo. I missed you so much. The news spread throughout the Divine Dynasty's capital, and countless people sighed. Mu Hongzi has guessed that you are coming, so he asked me to pick you up. His expression was somewhat complicated. His Excellency Realm King had specially selected the Guards of the Stars, and he was proud to be part of the Guards of the Stars. This man should be an invader from another great world outside the great netherworld. After all, he had lost those abilities. It was a cradle for cultivating talents, and only real geniuses could go to the Heaven Chief realm. It was a huge blow. The young man was very excited. He might be able to enter the Heaven Chief realm to cultivate and get the opportunity to break through to the level of the great sage. As the warship sped along, he turned his eyes and ignored the warships. In front of the restaurant, with a thump, the warship sped along the starry sky road, accompanied by billows of air. Their cooking skills seemed to have been carved into their bones. Bu Fong still shook his head with his hands clasped behind his back. Bu Fong looked at the beautiful woman in front of him in a daze. Sitting in a chair, Bu Fong took a deep breath. Rumble. There were many demigods in the Heaven Chief realm, and there were even a few gods among them. It felt as if time had stopped. This kind of skill was almost divine. Finally, he rose to his feet and closed the door. His business was booming. If he could capture this intruder, the World King would definitely appreciate him greatly and reward him with some cultivation methods and cultivation techniques. If he was given another chance to choose again, he might still choose to advance to the next realm. But that would not stop them from cooking. Although killing these people was just a matter of snapping his fingers, it was still a matter of time. He furrowed his brows. This Mu Hongzi, to Bu Fong's surprise, Mu Hongzi did not stay in Nether Prison, but in the Heaven Chief realm. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bu Fong took a step forward. The song ended. However, this Heaven Tree was completely different from the Heaven Tree in the past. I'm asking you a question. There was a thatched hut here. Inside the warship, on the small battlefield, energy cannonballs gathered and aimed at him. His mental force controlled the energy of the dishes, making them flow neatly in the air like threads. The young man said furiously. He did not even have the desire to hold a kitchen knife now. The young man was horrified. In fact, with the improvement of his strength, Bu Fong was ready to cook with his mental force. Soon, he came to the Imperial Palace. Although Bu Fong wanted to train his cooking skills and could not rely too much on the system, it seemed that he had underestimated many things. For a chef, he had lost his sense of taste, touch, mental force, and smell. The restaurants that were about to close suddenly became lively again. The people who were asked by Bu Fong were full of hope. Bu Fong was in a trance. All this happened when the system said he had leveled up. Besides, as the savior of the Xiai Divine Dynasty, Bu Fong was still their distinguished guest, even though he had lost his cooking skills. Glancing in the direction of the great netherworld, Bu Fong breathed a sigh of relief. He did not expect that he would be greeted by such a situation when he returned to the netherworld. He was like a student who got full marks in exams every day, only to find that everything was fake and that he could only get a 0 in every exam. When the energy cannonballs were an inch away from him, they stopped in their tracks. Now, he could only ask for directions. According to those people, several small warships flew over and surrounded Bu Fong's warship. All the abilities related to cooking had disappeared, including the sense of touch, taste, smell, mental force, and so on. Summer did not take Bu Fong to see Mu Hongzi immediately. Instead, she took Bu Fong and walked slowly through the Heaven Chief realm. The door was opened. Bu Fong sat in a chair. He raised a hand and rubbed the two little fellows' heads. If it were someone else, he might have broken down. Perhaps this test would be the greatest test of all. Although, with the disappearance of his mental strength, his condition was getting worse day by day. His taste, touch, and five senses seemed to have disappeared with him. Chapter 1674. Can't you be more normal? Summer was a little speechless as she watched Mu Hongzhi walk out of the thatched hut. Of course, it was just that Mu Hongzhi had walked out of the thatched hut. If a naked realm lord had walked out of the thatched hut, the atmosphere would have been inexplicably awkward. Realm Lord did not expect that Bufong would come back. Looking at Bufong's familiar face, Realm Lord Dit's eyes became moist. "Oh, little Boo-Boo." Realm Lord Dit strode his long legs toward Bufong, step by step, as if he was running under the setting sun with crystal tears. Bam! As Realm Lord Dit approached Bufong, Summer sent him flying with a slap, her face dark. "This guy, I don't like looking at him." Summer rubbed her fists and said. Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufong with a smile. He walked to Bufong's side, patted him on the shoulder, and sighed with emotion. Summer was gone, and Realm Lord Dit was also taken away. Realm Lord Dit wanted to talk about the old days with Bufong, but Summer grabbed his head and dragged him away. Only Mu Hongzhi and Bufong were left on the top of the heaven tree. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back. His white robe was so white that it seemed to shimmer. Standing on the tree with his hands clasped behind his back, he seemed to have merged with the entire Heaven Chief realm. In fact, it was Realm Lord Dit who had merged with the Heaven Chief realm. In front of the thatched hut, Bufong took out a chair from the Heaven and Earth farmland and sat on it, quietly watching Mu Hongzhi's performance. After a long moment of silence, Mu Hongzhi finally opened his mouth. "You're indeed the man I like. In such a short time, your cultivation base has reached the level of a god emperor." Mu Hongzhi turned around and said with a smile. His smile was like a spring breeze. Bufong didn't smile. He just nodded at Mu Hongzhi. It was because Bufong sensed that Mu Hongzhi's cultivation base seemed to be even more unfathomable. He might not even be a god emperor. Back then, I was only left with a remnant soul. However, after recuperating, my cultivation base has recovered to its peak. I used to love cooking, but now, it's been a long time since I've held a kitchen knife. Mu Hongzhi said. These words made Bufong squint his eyes slightly, and he became much more spirited. "Do you know what happened to me?" Bufong asked. As expected, Mu Hongzhi nodded. "Since you've chosen this path without hesitation, you're bound to encounter this situation. Now, you don't have a sense of taste, smell, or mental force. You're not a top chef now." Mu Hongzhi said. "Why?" Bufong narrowed his eyes. This was what he wanted to know. As expected, Mu Hongzhi knew. Mu Hongzhi fell silent. He slowly turned around and looked at Bufong, his eyes gradually becoming a little confused. "Because I used to be like you," Mu Hongzhi let out a sigh. "It's a choice. You can think of it as a test, but it's a little cruel. To make a person who loves cooking lose his sense of taste, touch, smell, and mental force. It's simply an inhumane torture," said Mu Hongzhi. "You have a good and optimistic attitude. Back then, I was frantically looking for a solution, frantically trying to regain my sense of smell, and I wanted to cook. I wanted to continue on the path of becoming a god of cooking. Unfortunately, reality gave me a cruel blow, and I failed in the end." Mu Hongzhi glanced at Bufong with a wry smile. He envied Bufong's current state. He was calm, which he could not do. Of course, Bufong's calmness might only be on the surface. "How can I regain my cooking skills?" asked Bufong. That was the key. However, Mu Hongzhi shook his head. "I don't know. It depends on you. This is actually a test given to you by it. If you can't complete it, you may be eliminated or even killed," said Mu Hongzhi. The he mentioned should be referring to the system. Did Mu Hongzhi not know? But I thought a lot after I was resurrected. Everyone has their own answer to this kind of test. Perhaps it wants you to find the essence of your cooking path. Everything has its essence, and if you don't figure it out, you won't be able to reach the top, Mu Hongzhi said seriously. At this moment, he saw himself, who was once confused, in Bufong. Unfortunately, there was no one to answer his questions in the past. Compared to Bufang, he was unfortunate. Otherwise, he might have gone further on the path of becoming a god of cooking. Find the essence of my cooking path. Bufang was stunned. Mu Hongzhi's words made him fall into deep thought. Although Bufang said he wanted to be the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, what was the real path to becoming a god of cooking? Bufang asked himself and found that he had never thought about it. Perhaps he had thought about it when he was condensing the heart of cooking path, but that was only superficial. Now, the system had sealed his mental force and slowly stripped away his sense of touch, smell, and taste. Perhaps it really wanted him to find the essence. If he could really find the essence, even if he didn't have all these, he would still be able to walk on that path without hesitation. Bufang's eyes lit up. Mu Hongzhi seemed to find that Bufang had listened to him. For a moment, he was a little envious. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Little one, come to me, handsome brother. Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufang, who was lost in thought. He smiled and did not disturb him. Instead, he turned to play with Little Hu and Xiaopi, who were sitting on Bufang's shoulders. Little Hu had the heaven god's blood in him, so his bloodline was no longer that of an ordinary nine-tailed fox. Xiaopi, on the other hand, made Mu Hongzhi narrow his eyes slightly. The next moment, the smile on his face grew brighter. Holding the two little ones in his arms, he left the thatched hut. Then, he left the place to Bufang. He also ordered that no one was allowed to step into the place. Bufang sat in a chair and looked into the distance. His eyes were blank as he fell into deep thought. It was not easy to walk to the end of a path because it was always covered with thorns and sharp stones, which made it very difficult to walk. Mu Hongzhi's words made Bufang fall into deep thought. He was thinking or making a choice. In the Heaven Chief realm, the prosperous fourth layer, the fourth layer of the Heaven Chief realm was the most prosperous. After Mu Hongzhi took charge of the Netherworld, he had improved the Heaven Chief realm. After all, the Heaven Chief realm belonged to him, and he had indescribable feelings for it. The Heaven Tree was his magic treasure, and he used it to guard the Heaven Chief realm. It was divided into 4 realms, which was the same as the Heaven Chief realm. Now, the intensity of the spiritual energy in each layer of the Heaven Chief realm was the same. However, the 4th layer was the most prosperous. It was because the Realm King's mansion was located in the 4th layer. Summer had found Mu Hongzhi a long time ago. When she found him, she rolled up her sleeves and fought with him for 300 rounds. Realm Lord Dit was now the incarnation of the great path of the Heaven Chief realm. To him, this was both a good and a bad thing. It was hard for him to improve his cultivation base. This was a bad thing. The good thing was that he was immortal from now on, unless the Heaven Chief realm was destroyed and disappeared. Otherwise, he, Realm Lord Dit, would definitely be the one who had lived the longest, even longer than the God Emperor. When he learned that Bufang had returned in the 1st layer of the Heaven Chief realm, many old acquaintances came to see Bufang. However, they didn't see him. They thought they would see him in a few days, but they waited for a long time. In the Heaven Chief realm, there were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. It was specially set by Mu Hongzhi. With his strength, it was a piece of cake for him to set the weather. Bufang sat in front of the thatched hut and stared quietly into the distance. Just like that, he looked into the distance quietly, as if he was hesitating, but also as if he was thinking. The pitter-patter of rain began to fall. The rain kept falling from the sky and soaked Bufang. However, Bufang still didn't move. The curtain of rain, which looked like a curtain of beads, was reflected in Bufang's eyes and seemed to be deeply reflected in his heart. Spring passed and the summer arrived. The sun was scorching. Bufang's hair had become dry. His lips seemed to be cracking. Summer arrived and autumn arrived. The autumn wind rustled. Many leaves fell from the thatched hut behind Bufang. The leaves were yellow and withered, fluttering in the air. Bufang sat motionless in the chair. The leaves piled up several layers. Autumn passed and winter arrived. Bufang didn't move at all. He was completely covered by the white snow, and his whole body couldn't even be seen. Time passed slowly just like that. No one disturbed him or woke him up. Occasionally, Mu Hongzhi would come. He would walk around Bu Fang's body a few times with little Hu and Xiaopi in his arms, and then leave. Mu Hongzhi had no idea what was on Bu Fang's mind. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Time passed. Finally, once again, the pure, white snow fell. Bu Fang moved. His fingers moved with difficulty, shaking off the snow on his body. Bu Fang opened his eyes. He raised his hand, and the snow fell. Bu Fang rose to his feet. With a swoosh, the leaves and snow fell all over the ground. Bu Fang reached out his hand and touched his face. He had a long beard on his face, which was covered with a long beard. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there. Summer passes quietly. F***CK. Humming a tune, Mu Hongzhi walked to the top of the heaven tree in a mink coat and found Bu Fang standing up. He was startled and his voice cracked. Boy, you moved? I thought you were going to turn into a Wang Fu stone and look at me for 3,000 years. Mu Hongzhi put one hand on his hip, patted his chest with the other, and rolled his eyes at Bu Fang. Coupled with his beautiful face, he looked a little flirtatious. Bu Fang raised his hand. Divine power swirled around him. His whole body trembled. Immediately, his beard receded, and the stains on his body disappeared. The vermilion robe fluttered, and he looked very energetic. However, if one looked closely, they would find that there was something different about Bu Fang. It was an indescribable change, a change in his temperament. The look in Bu Fang's eyes became rather deep. Looking at Mu Hongzhi, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Is there anything to eat? I'm hungry, Bu Fang said. Mu Hongzhi rolled his eyes. Let's go. I'll ask the Heaven Chief. I've trained to cook a good meal for you. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. Bu Fang had woken up. The news spread. Many people's spirits were shaken. Many acquaintances came to find him. The Realm Lord Dit, Summer, Hades Tenzang, the Black Dragon King, and other Netherworld friends all came to find him. Mu Hongzhi also made an arrangement for Bu Fang. The chefs of the Heaven Chief realm were all in high spirits, ready to show off their cooking skills. It was an event hosted by the Realm King. If they could win the Realm King's appreciation, they would enjoy endless benefits. In the fourth layer of the Heaven Chief realm, in the immortal city, in a vast square, countless Heaven Chief were ready to go. At Mu Hongzhi's order, they all began to cook. Immortal flames burned, hot steam rose, and a fragrant aroma assailed the nostrils. The Heaven Chief began to show off their skills and cook with all their might. Bu Fang sat in the judge's seat, his expression unchanged. He just watched the lively competition with mixed emotions. Soon, finally, a Heaven Chief finished cooking the first dish and came up with it. Mu Hongzhi pushed the dish to Bu Fang. Here, try it, Mu Hongzhi said. He looked hopefully at Bu Fang, wondering if Bu Fang had regained his senses of taste, smell, touch, and mental force. Bu Fang looked at the steaming dish, which seemed to be glistening with light. He picked up the spoon and gently scooped it up. The soup of the dish flowed down the spoon. It was extremely slippery, and steam rose from it and sprayed onto his face. Bu Fang took a deep breath. He grabbed the spoon and swallowed the food in the spoon into his stomach. The next moment, Bu Fang raised his eyebrows slightly. Chapter 1675. How is it? Does it taste good? Mu Hongzhi, who was sitting in a chair and wearing a mink fur cloak, looked curiously at Bu Fang. The others were also staring at him. Only Bu Fang knew whether it tasted good or not. If it did, it meant that the former owner Bu was back. Gulp. Bu Fang swallowed the food and shook his head with a calm expression. It doesn't taste good, Bu Fang said faintly. However, his movements weren't slow at all. Soon, he finished the entire dish. The others were a little disappointed. It was a pity that there was no taste. Mu Hongzhi also sighed. That was all he could do to help. In fact, he really hoped that Bu Fang could continue to walk the path of the god of cooking. At least, he was carrying his hope. He hoped that Bu Fang could help him finish the path that he couldn't finish. In fact, he also wanted to go to the top of the mountain to see the scenery. Bu Fang wasn't as sad as these people imagined. Instead, he was gorging himself. One dish after another was placed on the table, and Bu Fong ate them all, leaving not a drop of soup behind. After eating and drinking to his heart content, Bu Fong put down his chopsticks. He breathed out a sigh of relief. Snow was falling, covering the whole Heaven Chief realm in silver. It looked quite beautiful. As Bu Fong rose to his feet, Little Hu and Xiaopi jumped onto him. Holding Little Hu and Xiaopi in his arms, Bu Fong said goodbye to the crowd and strode away, disappearing into the wind and snow. Mu Hongzi looked at Bu Fong's back with a complicated look in his eyes. Summer and Dit, on the other hand, were slightly taken aback. Did Bu Fong just leave like that? When they followed him out, they found that Bu Fong's back was long gone. Just like how he came quietly and left quietly, not taking a single cloud with him. With Bu Fong's strength, if he wanted to hide, they wouldn't be able to find him. Bu Fong stayed in the Heaven Chief realm for about 3 days. He walked down the layers of the building. When he walked to the first floor and looked back at the former Heaven Chief restaurant, his expression was a little complicated. The restaurant was the same as before, but the people had changed. After leaving the Heaven Chief realm, Bu Fong continued walking. He came to Nether Prison and walked quietly. Wherever there was good food, he would eat there. He was fast, and he had time. Although he couldn't taste the food, Bu Fong didn't care. He just ate unhurriedly. After eating the Nether Prison, they would arrive at Earth Prison. When it came to Hell, Bu Fong's expression was even more complicated. Hades era, Lord Go, it all came from Hell. But now they were all gone. He didn't know where Hades era had gone. Lord Go didn't tell him where he had gone either. Yu, on the other hand, was brought back to Void City. Bu Fong breathed a sigh of relief. When he recovered his mental force, he would continue to walk and look for you, Lord Go, and the others. In fact, Bu Fong's favorite time was when everyone was in the restaurant, eating delicious food and watching the sunset together. Bu Fong walked on foot, carrying Little Hu and Xiaopi, across the desert, over the mountains, and across the swamps and lakes. He looked for all kinds of delicious food. Every world had different cuisines, but they all had the same general characteristics. Of course, a large part of it depended on the changes in the environment. The food in the desert was certainly different from the food in the mountains, and the food in the swamps was naturally different from the food in the lakes. But no matter what, even under very difficult conditions, delicious food still existed. That was the charm of food. Earth Prison, the Ruined Prison, the Abyss, Bu Fong went to all of them. Finally, Bu Fong returned to the Hidden Dragon continent. It was a continent he was very familiar with. The continent was also very big. Bu Fong still walked at an unhurried pace. He had plenty of time. After becoming a god emperor, Bu Fong had almost unlimited time. However, even if he had unlimited life, he might not be able to find a path. After all, there would always be a dead end. In the imperial capital of the Light Wind Empire, the imperial capital was bustling with activity again. People came and went, and the streets were bustling. Bu Fong walked with Little Hu in his arms. His vermilion robe was covered with dust and looked dirty. Bu Fong's hair was also very disheveled, and he wore many pieces of cloth that recorded the delicacies of various places. As he walked on the street, the people around him looked at Bu Fong with some disgust. After all, such a dirty man could not have come from the imperial capital. Even the beggars in the imperial capital were cleaner than this man. He walked quietly in the imperial capital. Bu Fong didn't go to Fong Fong's little store. Instead, he went to other restaurants in the imperial capital. So many years had passed. The Light Wind Empire had also changed a lot. Many people had changed. Perhaps they had gone to a higher place, or perhaps they had turned into a pile of dirt. However, Bu Fong didn't come back to reminisce about the old days. He didn't look for any acquaintances. He just came and left quietly, as long as he could eat what he wanted. Boss Jean walked with his fat belly, his face glowing. He had aged a lot, but his desire for delicacies hadn't changed. He was eager to go to Fong Fong's little store to eat. All of a sudden, a black shadow passed by him. Boss Jean was bewildered. He turned around to see the figure with messy clothes and disheveled hair. On that figure's back was a fox and a golden mantis shrimp. What a familiar figure! Boss Jean rubbed his fat belly, saying, unfortunately, he couldn't recognize Bu Fong. Bufong didn't feel nostalgic. The cloth hanging on his body was full, which was his experience along the way. He had forgotten how many years he had spent tasting these delicacies. Although he couldn't taste them, he somehow felt happy. Actually, the hidden dragon continent had many beautiful sceneries and delicacies. In the past, he came and went in a hurry, so he didn't notice them. But now, he had a lot of time to make up for all the things he had missed. Time flew. Time flew. Above the starry sky, on a star that was radiating resplendent light. This was a dead, lifeless star with life. Dust was everywhere. Perhaps many years ago, this star still had traces of life. Unfortunately, today, everything was just an illusion. Bufong sat cross-legged on it. Little Hu and Xiaopi were playing on the star. Following Bufong, they had eaten a lot of delicious food. Little Hu had gained weight. Xiaopi had become more dazzling. Sitting in the starry sky, he looked at the boundless world. Bufong's eyes were a little blurred. Looking back on the path he had taken, he couldn't help but feel emotional. In the past, he had been in a hurry and missed too many things. And now, he needed to make up for all the things he had missed. Looking up at the sky, in the curtain of stars, a star crossed the sky at high speed. Bufong sat cross-legged on the ground, his eyes focused. Then his mind flickered. The white tiger heaven stove, the black turtle constellation walk, the Chilean transmigration ladle, the dragon bone knife, and the vermilion robe all burst out with a strange light. The light shot up to the sky. Heaven and earth changed color. Bufong's dirty body and vigorous hair restored their tidiness. He looked like a real heaven god. Swish! The spring of life flowed backward. Bufong was carefully washing his palms, inside and out, without a speck of dust. A moment later, he held the dragon bone kitchen knife. Boom! The whole star seemed to shake. In the distance, the eyes of Xiaopi and Little Hu, who were playing, suddenly lit up. Squeak! 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 The two raced over, looking at Bufong, who was holding a kitchen knife in the distance. After so many years, Bufong finally touched a kitchen knife. Boom! The scarlet, divine flame surged, its scorching heat filling heaven and earth. The black turtle constellation walk flew up, and the white tiger heaven stove also sat in the sky. Bufong was ready to cook. Portions of ingredients flew out one by one. They hovered around Bufong. These are not ordinary ingredients. They were all precious ingredients from the heaven and earth farmland. Some of them were still stained with fresh soil. Bufong closed his eyes. He seemed to be adjusting his breathing, as if he was comprehending something. This was Bufong's first breakthrough. This cooking was very important to him. If he failed, he might end up like Mu Hongzi, a failure that would never end up again. But Bufong didn't want to give up like this. The journey of tasting and searching for delicacies was, in fact, a process of self-understanding for Bufong. Now, it was finally time to break through. He knew that the system was also waiting for this moment. As Bufong's hand shook, the dragon bone kitchen knife spun. Inexplicably, there seemed to be a dragon roar ringing out. Bufong arched his brows and twitched the corner of his mouth. The familiar feeling seemed to have returned. He couldn't cook without a sense of taste. He couldn't cook without a sense of touch. He couldn't cook without mental force. No, all these were just excuses. He exhaled. Bufong's hand shook. The ingredients hovering in the air flew up in an instant. Holding the dragon bone kitchen knife, Bufong slashed it down. This slash turned into thousands of streams of light. One by one, the ingredients were cut up by the flowing light. He let go of the dragon bone kitchen knife. Bufong grabbed the black turtle constellation walk. The black turtle constellation walk hit the white tiger heaven stove with a thunderous roar. The terrible explosion was deafening. Rumble, rumble. The black turtle constellation walk seemed to weigh 10,000 pounds. Every time it smashed down, the starry sky shook. The black turtle constellation walk turned scarlet. Oil was poured into the walk. Sizzling sounds rang out as steam filled the sky. As soon as the ingredients entered the wok, a rumbling sound rang out. That was the sound of energy colliding with each other. Without mental force, It was impossible to control the energy in these ingredients. However, Bufong didn't care. The Chilean transmigration ladle fell, scooping up the ingredients and flipping them over. Instantly, waves of fragrance filled the air. Bufong couldn't smell it, but little Hu and Xiaopi, who were in the distance, could. On the other hand, the fox and the shrimp were dancing with joy. They smelled the fragrance as if they could smell the whole world. It was a fragrance they were familiar with. Rumble. The entire starry sky seemed to tremble. Shocking energy fluctuations erupted in the starry sky. Lights swirled. One figure after another shot out of the starry sky. Mu Hongzi stood on a star with his hands clasped behind his back. His beautiful face glowed with fluorescent light, looking indescribably beautiful. Unfortunately, he was a man. Xiaji followed beside him and watched quietly. Logically speaking, Realm Lord Ditai could not leave the immortal cooking realm. However, now that his cultivation base had reached the level of a god king, he could see Bufong's appearance with his projection. Bufong was cooking. Many people were paying attention to him. Many old friends were watching Bufong. Is Bufong going to break down and build up? Xiaxia's beautiful eyes slightly trembled as she looked at Bufong, who was cooking below, and could not help but murmur. Break down and build up? Mu Hongzi narrowed his eyes and shook his head. It's not destruction before reconstruction. Without destruction, there would be no reconstruction. He just found a path to the light in the darkness. Mu Hongzi chuckled. Rumble. A terrible rumble rang out in the starry sky, and the galaxy seemed to be turning upside down. Bufong sat cross-legged on the dead star. Holding a spatula, he tossed the wok. The toss seemed to break the sky. Sizzle, sizzle. The sound of steam rising from the wok echoed between heaven and earth. Billowing hot air rose to the sky. The dead star was instantly shrouded by a layer of clouds and mist. Bufong stood in front of the white tiger heaven stove. His hand shook. The ingredients in the wok churned and bloomed with thousands of streams of light. The light was so dazzling that it was dazzling. It was as if the clouds and mist were about to be pushed aside to see the bright moon. Swish, he tossed the wok, and the ingredients flew into the Chilean transmigration ladle. Carefully, he picked up a blue and white porcelain plate. Then, he placed the plate on the stove. Then, he poured the dish in the ladle. Swish, the dish shone brilliantly, and the soup emitted a delicious aroma. It was a dish that smelled delicious just by looking at it. Buzz ripples of energy continuously spread out from the dish. Every time it spread out, it would cause the void to tremble. In the sky, Mu Hongzi and the others widened their eyes. They knew that the most critical moment had come. Looking at the blue and white porcelain bowl, Bufong exhaled softly. He raised his hand and picked up a pair of chopsticks. This was the first dish he had cooked after tasting countless delicacies. It could be said that it had combined all of Bufong's insights into this dish. The flowing soup bloomed with a dazzling golden light. The fragrant aroma made people salivate involuntarily. Bufong reached out his chopsticks, picked up a piece of sweet and sour ribs, and slowly lifted it up. The soup stretched into a long thread. Bufong put the sweet and sour ribs into his mouth. Then, he took a deep breath, clenched his teeth, and chewed. Slurp, slurp. It was very calm, and there were no earth-shattering changes. Bufong opened his eyes. As he chewed the sweet and sour ribs, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. The aroma flowed in his mouth and filled his mouth. It was as if all the flavors of sourness, sweetness, bitterness, and spiciness rushed to his heart in an instant. Bufong's long-lost senses of taste, smell, and touch all returned in an instant. Buzz's invisible energy spread out from Bufong's body. It spread in all directions. At this moment, the deathly silent planet once again glowed with vitality. Tender green branches broke out from the soil and covered the entire planet in an instant. Bufong closed his eyes and swallowed the sweet and sour ribs in his mouth. At that moment, like a stone thrown into a calm pond, it set off monstrous waves. The waves spread and turned into a great flood. Bam! A mighty mental force suddenly spread out from Bu Fong's body. The sky changed color. Rumble. Suddenly, a terrifying anomaly appeared in the starry sky. Dense thunderclouds covered the sky. Mu Hongzi, Summer, and the others' eyes shrank, and they all sucked in cold breaths. This is the heaven god, tribulation. Down below, Bu Fong closed his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up. In his head, the long-lost voice of the system rang out. However, this voice was a little different from before. Chapter 1676. Bu Fong didn't pay much attention to the heaven god tribulation. His attention was on the long-lost voice of the system. How long had it been since he heard the system's voice? It was a little different from the system's voice in his memory. In the past, the system's voice was solemn and earnest, more like a formulaic statement. However, the tone of the system's voice that rang out at this moment seemed to have a little more spirituality. Yes, it was spirituality. System upgrade completed. System data updating, the system said. However, this voice was a little more lively, like the nagging of a family. Bu Fong frowned. He stood where he was, his hands moving nonstop as he stuffed the cooked sweet and sour ribs into his mouth. A piece of sweet and sour ribs was soft and tender. His lost sense of taste, touch, and smell all returned at this moment. Suddenly, it was as if he had just had a dream. It was a very real dream. What spread in his mouth was a kind of salty taste with a hint of sourness and sweetness. This was the taste of sweet and sour ribs. The taste of the sweet and sour sauce and the taste of the meat mixed together to create an excellent texture. It was hard to imagine that this was a dish cooked by a chef who had sealed off his sense of taste, smell, and touch. To put it in a more artistic way, this was a dish cooked with heart. It had nothing to do with taste, smell, touch, or even mental force. But to put it simply, it was a work of experience. Bu Fong used countless years of experience to gather this dish. It broke the shackles and broke the confusion in his heart. In front of his foggy eyes, a bright path was torn open, and a path was opened. This was real cooking with heart. Swish, Bu Fong stood where he was, immersed in the delicious taste of the food. The dead star under his feet had completely revived, as if it had been reborn. There were flowers and green leaves all over the mountains, and there was a gurgling stream that nourished the star. A star that had been dead for countless years had been revived because of Bu Fong's dish. The revival of a thought was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Rumble, thunder rumbled. Layers of clouds rapidly covered the sky, and within the clouds, the nomological laws and the great Tao were constantly spreading. Bu Fong's actions had already attracted the attention of the laws of the chaos verse. The law wheel opened up a path in the starry sky, tearing cracks. Bu Fong had seen a heaven god tribulation once. Back then, the Xiai divine emperor had experienced it in the divine dynasty. Unfortunately, at that time he was ambushed. Even the strongest divine emperor, the Xiai divine emperor, nearly died. In the end, when Bu Fong took action, it even drew the attention of a heavenly deity. A palm descended, almost obliterating Bu Fong. Naturally, Bu Fong would not forget the heavenly god tribulation. System data update complete. Detected that the host is qualified to advance. Do you wish to advance? The system's voice was solemn, but there was a hint of quick-wittedness in it. Bu Fong's expression remained the same. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the boundless sky. After that, he should be in the heavenly god realm. Bu Fong was also looking forward to this profound realm. System, have you become a spirit? However, Bu Fong suddenly changed the topic and asked another question. The system was speechless. How can a wise and mighty man like you, who is going to become the god of cooking standing at the top of the starry sky, tease a little system like this? The system asked playfully. If a person were standing in front of him at this moment, that person would probably roll his eyes when he said that. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. Sure enough, this system has become a spirit. Or is this the real system? Bu Fong exhaled. I choose to advance. Bufong said. As soon as he said that, his head rumbled. Rumble. Bufong felt as if his spirit sea was about to explode. In the blink of an eye, everything in front of him turned completely dark. Bufong sank into his spirit sea. Everything in his spirit sea seemed to be in ruins. It looked like a dead star. Is this really my spirit sea? Bufong was in a trance. His spirit sea, which was as vast as a vast sea, had actually dried up. What's going on? Bufong frowned. Or perhaps all the mental energy in my spirit sea was taken away by the system as the energy for the system's upgrade? This was the most plausible explanation. Rumble. While Bufong was thinking, his spirit sea began to collapse. In an instant, the scene disappeared. There was a huge explosion, and countless flames surged in all directions. Then, all kinds of beastly roars rang out. The gray fog, which had concealed the artifact's spirit, slowly drifted over and covered Bufong's spirit sea. Little by little, light bloomed in his mind. The next moment, 1 star, 2 stars, Bufong's spirit sea turned into a sky full of stars, a boundless starry sky. Roar. The golden dragon hovered in the starry sky, looking very magical. The vermilion bird spread its wings and emerged from the fire. The white tiger roared and walked out, 1 step at a time. The black turtle carried the world peak on its back and walked slowly. The Qilin soared into the sky, exuding a boundless aura. 5 weapon spirits hovered in the starry sky, guarding every corner of the starry sky with a majestic aura. Each artifact spirit had a pillar of light rising from its body, which represented a supreme law of the universe. It made Bufong's spirit sea extremely stable. It was as solid as a rock, as if it could not be broken at all. Compared with the vast sea of the past, the starry sky today was many times tougher. In the starry sky, stars gathered and constantly turned into strange patterns. Bufong's pupils constricted. Looking at those patterns, he suddenly found them very familiar. Gourmet arrays? Bufong murmured. Yes, the patterns formed by those stars were gourmet arrays. 1 gourmet array after another occupied Bufong's spirit sea, causing Bufong's aura to rise and stabilizing the originally unstable light beams of the supreme laws of the universe. Each of them had a gourmet array guarding them. Bufong closed his eyes. Then he slowly opened them, but his eyes seemed to be bursting with light. The light was dazzling and brilliant. As he opened his eyes, the hearts of Mu Hongzi and the others shook. It was as if the whole starry sky had lit up. A majestic aura descended from the sky. Buzz, at this moment, Bufong's spirit sea was completely restored. My host, you have a system panel that you can check. Can you check it? The system's playful voice rang out. It made Bufong feel goosebumps all over his body. He still found the serious and earnest system more interesting. Check it, Bufong said. As soon as he said that, the system panel floated in front of him. However, it was completely different from the previous one. Host, Bufong cultivation base. Heaven god, still breaking through. Cooking skills, quasi-god of cooking, exclusive god of cooking's menu. Not yet unlocked, Bufong paused when he saw the panel. It looked familiar and strange at the same time. It was so simple that it seemed to be beyond Bufong's expectation. There was a lot of content in the previous panel about knife skills and many techniques. But with a single level up, everything had disappeared. And his cooking skills, what did the quasi-god of cooking mean? Bufong's heart skipped a beat. The word quasi-god of cooking was used well. It meant that he was only 1 step away from the realm of god of cooking. Host, wake up. There may not be one god of cooking among 10,000 quasi-gods of cooking. Please recognize your position. I don't want to give you too much of a blow. The system said. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. Sure enough, the serious and earnest system was more pleasing to him. Now, this system had become a spirit and had even learned how to have a sharp tongue. However, according to the system, the quasi-god of cooking might only be 1 step closer to the god of cooking realm. At the very least, compared to the hazy state before, it was much clearer now. Bufong felt as if there was a clear path in front of him. And what he had to do was to step onto that path that was full of thorns and mud, all the way to the peak, even if this path is full of hardship and death. System, what does it mean that the God of Cooking's menu is not unlocked yet? Bufong was also puzzled and asked the system. This is the function of the system after the upgrade. It is also the main way for the host to improve his strength. The system said, this is the God of Cooking's exclusive recipe. Every time you cook a dish that can be recorded in the God of Cooking's menu, your strength and realm will be improved. Haven't I already reached the heavenly God realm? Bufong frowned. If he could still improve, what realm would he reach? Surpassing the heavenly God realm? Wasn't that the God of Cooking? Host, if you want to know more, please become a heavenly God first. The host said. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. Why has the system become so naughty? A naughty system is not a good system. Bufong took a deep breath, and his eyes became clear. He exited the system interface and returned to his body. He stood on the planet. Many of his old friends were watching him in the starry sky. Hades Tenzang, Muhongzi, Summer, Dit, and the Realm Lord were all watching Bufong. The Heaven God tribulation was a catastrophic calamity. It could be seen from the tragic state of the Shai Divine Emperor when he transcended the tribulation. In the chaotic universe, the Heaven Gods did not allow the birth of new Heaven Gods. If it had not been for Bufong, the Shai Divine Emperor might have died. Therefore, everyone was curious about how Bufong would deal with the situation. Rumble. Bufong brewed his emotions for a while on the planet. Soon, he rose into the sky. Step by step, he walked toward the starry sky. Thunderclouds came and engulfed him in an instant. Above the thunderclouds, a palace appeared. It was a palace that was condensed from lightning. It exuded an unparalleled, terrifying aura. Before Bufong became a heaven god, he already had the strength to fight a saint of the Great Path. In fact, Bufong did not have a specific feeling about his fighting prowess. There must be different levels for heaven gods, just like soul overlords and great soul overlords. As for the levels of heaven gods, Bufong would need to explore them by himself. Rumble. Lightning exploded. The power of the heaven god tribulation covered almost a quarter of the chaotic universe. Countless experts in the Titan Divine Dynasty, the Shai Divine Dynasty, and the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty sensed the terrible fluctuation and looked up. In the Shai Divine Dynasty's palace, the Shai Divine Emperor's old face twitched. That familiar aura caused his entire body to slightly tremble. This is the heaven god tribulation, who is undergoing it again. No matter what, in that instant, the entire chaos verse seemed to have been thrown into an uproar. Above the thunderclouds, the palace surged. After that, the thunderclouds rumbled. All of a sudden, it was torn apart, and the lightning punishment descended. This was blackish-purple lightning. In the primitive universe, it would have a general name, apocalyptic lightning tribulation. Not even chaotic saints dared to touch the thunder tribulation. Compared to the heaven god tribulation that the Shai Divine Emperor transcended, it was much stronger. This world-exterminating lightning tribulation was much more powerful than before. It simply didn't give anyone a way out. This also showed how powerful Bufong was. In the thunderclouds, countless lightning soldiers descended. They were filled with killing intent and held divine weapons in their hands. Some wore thunder armor and rode on chariots. Some rode on thunder dragons and shot arrows. In an instant, a world-destroying pressure suddenly descended, making Bufong feel as if he was carrying the entire universe on his back. The faces of Mu Hongzi and the others changed dramatically, and they retreated to a distance. They didn't dare to touch this kind of tribulation lightly. Otherwise, they would be swept up in it and might even be blasted into ashes in an instant. Mu Hongzi was the only one present who could withstand the power of this thunder tribulation. As for the others who came into contact with it, they would instantly collapse, and even their souls would be extinguished. That was enough to show how terrifying it was. At this moment, What Bufong was facing was a sea of lightning. Ancient celestial soldiers. The vermilion robe on Bufong shook violently. The next moment, Bufong suddenly burst out laughing. His eyes flickered. He wore the vermilion robe, with the dragon bone knife in his left hand and the Chilean transmigration ladle in his right. He stood on the white tiger stove and the black turtle constellation walk above his head. Bufong was in high spirits. So what if it was a world-ending thunder tribulation? So what if the heavenly deities were spying on them? So what if the laws were crushing them? He would crush them all. With that thought in mind, Bufong laughed heartily and charged into the sea of lightning. Chapter 1677. It was a scene that could destroy the world. Thunder rumbled, and the lightning turned into a human figure. The purple-black lightning tribulation seemed to carry an aura of destruction from the universe, bringing with it an extremely terrible energy. The heaven god tribulation was not just a lightning tribulation. The world-destroying lightning tribulation was only one of them. Purple lightning, purple fire, and purple wind blew from the depths of the universe, as if to annihilate everything. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Fortunately, this lightning tribulation would not affect the great worlds. Otherwise, the netherworld and heaven chief realm would be reduced to ruins. Its power was really terrible. It was as if a real heaven god had descended to destroy everything. In the chaotic universe, it was very difficult to become a heaven god. This tribulation was not something that a god emperor could withstand. How could they withstand it? They couldn't. Each bolt of lightning was like the attack of a heaven god. Bufong laughed. Yes, he was laughing. Of course, that kind of laughter was just opening his mouth, and his face didn't even move. Bufong felt that it was better to laugh at this moment. Transcending the tribulation in high spirits was more dignified than going through it in silence. In the future, if someone asked, he could say that when Bufong was transcending the tribulation, he laughed 3 times, and the lightning tribulation dispersed. It was better than heaven god Bufong's tribulation. He put on a paralyzed face and didn't make a sound. He endured 3,000 bolts of lightning with great difficulty and was almost killed. In many people's eyes, it was better for Bufong not to laugh. Rumble. Tens of thousands of lightning soldiers rushed down from the palace above the lightning. The purple-black lightning carried the power to destroy the world. This kind of power was really terrible. However, Bufong was fearless. He was full of energy now. Boom! The next moment, a lightning spear fell and smashed hard on Bufong. In a flash, Bufong was engulfed by countless bolts of purple lightning. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of thunder colliding shot into his ears and resounded endlessly. At this moment, heaven and earth became dazzling. Yes, it was the radiance of lightning. The sea of lightning swallowed Bufong, and he went silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. Did it end before it even started? The number 1 heaven god tribulation in all of eternity was indeed awesome. Mu Hongzhi was also a little taken aback. It's impossible that Bufong can't even block one strike, right? Sure enough, just as these thoughts appeared in his mind, Bufong moved. His body abruptly straightened like a resplendent star, instantly breaking free of the countless lightning shackles. Bang! One by one, Bufong broke free from the thunder chains. The lightning soldiers held their weapons and fought with Bufong. Each lightning soldier was equivalent to a peak-level god king, and these were just the small ones. If it was a lightning soldier with a mount, it would be equivalent to a god emperor. This lineup was simply frightening. No wonder it was called the apocalyptic thunder tribulation. This power was truly terrifying. Bang, bang, bang. With the dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand, Bufong fought with the lightning soldiers. Who said that chefs couldn't fight? A kitchen knife was also a knife, and when it was waved, its lethality was equally shocking. Pucci. A lightning soldier was cut in half by Bufong. It was simple and violent. Bufong didn't use any divine power or knife technique. To deal with the enemy, he just chopped with the kitchen knife, smashed with the black turtle constellation walk, and smacked with the Chilean transmigration ladle. One by one, the lightning soldiers were beheaded, their bodies were smashed, and their chests exploded. Then, they crumbled and turned into purple lightning arcs that darted away. Unfortunately, after killing one, there was another. More and more lightning soldiers piled up and swallowed Bufong's figure. There were probably tens of thousands of them. It was truly terrifying to fight one against 10,000. The crowd fell silent as they looked at Bufong, who seemed to be drowned in a sea of lightning and kept struggling. Even a little bit of this tribulation could kill them, but Bufong was fearlessly moving about in the sea of lightning. It was truly amazing. Realm Lord Dit and Hades Tenzang fell silent. Had Bufong grown to such a level without them noticing? How long had it been? It turned out that there was really such a genius in the world. Mu Hongxi's eyes were filled with amazement. As a host, perhaps he was the only one who knew how amazing Bufong was. Even among the hosts, Bufong's excellence was hard to conceal. This expressionless junior might really be able to create a miracle and reach a height that even he had never reached before. It was something that many chefs dreamed of. But before that, Bufong needed to resist the heaven god tribulation. Boom! Bufong was forced to retreat. His knife kept stabbing into the lightning warrior's body. The battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. On this day, the whole great netherworld was filled with the rumbling of thunder. The starry sky at night was even brighter than the day. The Xiai divine emperor, Xiao Yinyu, the Titan crown prince, and the others all flew over. How could such fluctuations not attract their attention? This was a heaven god tribulation, which only appeared once in the chaotic universe. Only those with extraordinary talent were qualified to trigger it. Bufong cut a path through the lightning soldiers that filled the sky. In the distance, a lightning general riding a winged dragon locked his eyes on Bufong with a spear in his hand. Rumble! Bufong laughed with an expressionless face, then rushed forward. Boom! The lightning-winged dragon flapped its wings and sped toward Bufong at lightning speed. A spear pierced through Bufong's dragon-bone kitchen knife and stabbed his vermilion robe. With a ripping sound, it went right through his body. Bufong took several steps back as he was hit by the tremendous force. Bam! He stomped on the starry sky, and the thunderclouds seemed to scatter. Bufong steadied himself, his eyes cold. This was a difficult path, but he would kill anyone who tried to stop him. The dragon-bone kitchen knife slashed down, shattering the lightning spear. The remaining half of the spear was still in Bufong's body. Slash! With a swing of the black turtle constellation walk, the lightning general and the winged dragon were smashed into a ball of lightning by Bufong. Rumble! Bolts of lightning shot toward Bufong. In the distance, the lightning soldiers cleared a path, revealing a dozen lightning generals riding winged dragons. Each of these lightning generals had a fluctuating aura. A battle was about to break out. Bufong fought the lightning generals. Slash! Slash! The lightning spears kept stabbing into Bufong's body. Blood spattered and dyed his vermilion robe red. Purple lightning arcs danced as if to paralyze Bufong's body. However, Bufong's surging blood energy had broken through the paralysis of the lightning. Bufong shook his head and exhaled. His body was pierced by numerous lightning spears. Host, you can do it. Host, you can do it. As the god of cooking who wants to stand at the peak of the starry sky, beat them. In his head, the system's cheering voice rang out. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. The serious system was more likable. At least, it wasn't so noisy. Boom! Bufong's body shook. Instantly, the lightning spears piercing his body were broken. Bufong took a deep breath. In the distance, the densely packed thunder soldiers once again surrounded them. Bufong let out a long cry. Immediately, the golden dragon, vermilion bird, black turtle, white tiger, and Qilin rushed out from behind him, attacking the lightning soldiers. With the help of the artifact spirits, the pressure on Bufong was greatly reduced. The purple flames spread out, and the scorching heat caused the void to distort. Bufong focused his eyes and snapped his fingers. Immediately, a scarlet divine flame emerged. It was the divine flame that had merged with the primordial fire of the human race. As soon as it appeared, it suppressed the purple flame and even swallowed it like a greedy beast. Perhaps even the heaven god Tribulation did not expect this. If fire could not do it, wind would come. The purple wind blew rapidly, as if it came from the depths of the starry sky. As the wind blew, flesh and bones seemed to be separated. It was the wind of nirvana, a wind that could even shatter souls. In the face of the wind, Bufong was fearless and kept moving forward. Swish, the vermilion robe kept fluttering in the wind. The 5 artifact spirits were still fighting, and countless lightning soldiers were being extinguished. Bufong felt that the connection between him and the artifact spirits was getting closer and closer. Fighting side by side with them had deepened his understanding of the god of cooking Set. Perhaps this was an improvement in his understanding of the spiritual level. Above the lightning, the wheel of law emerged. It was the manifestation of the laws of the universe. The power of law was projected into the lightning, and then 5 figures stepped out of it. They were 5 existences clad in lightning armors, entangled in the lightning. They represented the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Mu Hongzi, the Xiai divine emperor, and the others all frowned. This heaven god Tribulation is strange. It's making things difficult for Owner Bu. The Xiai divine emperor said solemnly. The Xiai divine emperor said solemnly. As someone who had transcended a heaven god Tribulation, he knew very well what it was like. No matter how terrible it was, there should not be so many tribulations. Tens of thousands of lightning soldiers, god emperor level lightning generals. And now, there was a lightning commander who comprehended the supreme laws of the universe. The lightning of destruction, the wind of nirvana, the fire of all things. These were all extremely terrifying cosmic energies. If it were someone else, even a top god emperor would have died. Even an ordinary god emperor would not have been able to withstand such power. Even an ordinary saint of the Great Path would not have been able to withstand such power. Could it be that someone is deliberately harming Owner Bu with a lightning tribulation of this level? Is he not allowed to break through? That was what everyone thought. Mu Hongzi frowned. What the Xiai divine emperor and the others said made sense. Even though Bufong had the system and great opportunities, it was impossible for him to encounter a lightning tribulation of this level, right? It was simply not giving him a way out. The aura of the lightning marshal transformed from the 5 supreme laws of the universe was extremely terrifying. It was almost comparable to that of Soul 13 and an ordinary saint of the Great Path. With Bufong's current state, it was very difficult for him to deal with an existence of this level. However, Bufong did not retreat. Holding the wok and the knife, he did not say anything. Instead, he burst out laughing and rushed up. He fought the lightning marshal, who had comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Bufong's supreme laws of the universe kept spreading out from time to time. He was having a great time fighting. Bufong was really strong. The Xiai divine emperor and the others had to admit that. The weak chef from back then had now grown to the peak of this world. His strength was almost no weaker than that of a heaven god. Slash! Blood sprayed out of Bufong's mouth. His vermilion robe was in tatters, but it was constantly repairing itself. He was coughing up blood, and his body was charred by the lightning bolts. However, he did not retreat. He had killed 3 of the lightning marshals, who had comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Now, only 2 were left. The lightning marshals had no emotions. They only knew how to attack and kill with every strike, and they had mastered the supreme laws of the universe. However, they had beaten Bufong to a sorry state. Bufong's energy and blood were extremely weak. They were almost extinguished. All the lightning soldiers around him were blown away. The artifact spirits had also returned to Bufong's spirit sea. The violent panting seemed to linger in everyone's ears. All eyes were fixed on Bufong, who was standing under the thunderclouds, and they were all silent. Bufong shook his head. The next moment, He flipped his hand. Cooking ingredients flew out. Under the bombardment of thousands of lightning bolts, Bufong was cooking in the sea of lightning. The oil boiled, and the ingredients flew. The Chilean transmigration ladle spun in Bufong's hand. Although Bufong looked very miserable at the moment, when it came to cooking, Bufong was full of energy. The ingredients were stacked on the Chilean transmigration ladle, and the milky white sauce covered the ingredients. The oil in the wok was boiling and splashing. Sizzle. The ingredients in the Chilean transmigration ladle fell into the wok and immediately tumbled. Smack. 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 Bufong slapped the wok. Pieces of oyster pancakes, flashing with lightning bolts and bursting with energy, flew up. They were grabbed by Bufong and stuffed into his mouth. He was cooking oyster pancakes in the sea of lightning. The oyster pancakes, which carried lightning bolts, were eaten by Bufong. It was as if lightning bolts were scouring his body. Bufong's energy and blood, which had fallen silent, suddenly boiled. Bufong's face glowed again as he charged toward the three lightning marshals. Even though the law of time, the law of space, and the law of transmigration spread, none of them could stop Bufong. Rumble, rumble. Finally, under Bufong's black wok, the three lightning marshals were crushed to pieces. Bufong roared and rose to his feet. At this point, all the lightning soldiers, lightning generals, and lightning marshals were destroyed. The heaven god tribulation was finally over. So what if heaven was jealous of him? Bufong proved with his actions that a black wok could smash the sky. The thunderclouds in the sky were still slowly dispersing. The palaces seemed to be vanishing. The heaven god tribulation was finally over. In the distance, everyone's suspenseful hearts were finally at ease. Suddenly, a smile bloomed on Mu Hongzhi's beautiful face. The shy divine emperor had a complicated look in his eyes. Suddenly, someone froze. Bufong, with the corners of his mouth curled upward, frowned. Leaning on the black wok, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. There, in the starry sky, the center of the dissipating thunderclouds spun slowly and turned into a huge thundercloud vortex. And from within the thundercloud vortex, there seemed to be a majestic figure standing in it. Rumble. A terrible aura spread in an instant, making everyone hold their breath. The shy divine emperor and the others were stunned. This is a heaven god. The shy divine emperor's pupils constricted as he sucked in a cold breath. Bufong narrowed his eyes. He looked at the heaven god. The heaven god's face was wooden as he stood in the thundercloud vortex. The next moment, slowly, he reached out his hand. In the starry sky, thousands of energies gathered and turned into a palm. Then he threw a palm straight at Bufong. Chapter 1678. Rumble. The entire starry sky seemed to be trembling. That terrifying palm slammed down from the depths of the vortex-shaped thunderclouds, shattering the sky. This palm smashed the silence in everyone's hearts, causing countless people to be horrified. A heaven god. How could it be a heaven god? A heaven god is attacking again. Everyone exclaimed. Those who had experienced the shy divine emperor's heaven god tribulation were all horrified. That time, the same thing had happened. At that time, a heaven god had slapped down from the depths of the thunderclouds to kill Bufong. And now, the same scene had happened again. What was the grudge between a heaven god and Bufong? If that time was because Bufong secretly devoured the laws, what about this time? This time, Bufong had transcended his heaven god tribulation. Why would a heaven god kill him again? At this moment, the shy divine emperor and the others thought of many things. Mu Hongzhi narrowed his eyes. He resisted the urge to attack because he knew he could not. The heaven god tribulation was not over yet, and once he attacked, he would be doomed eternally. Don't worry, Bufong will be fine, Mu Hongzhi said with a smile as he glanced at the nervous Summer beside him. Summer did, and the others breathed sighs of relief. Mu Hongzhi was so beautiful that he would not lie. Bufong was in a very bad state at the moment. His body was exhausted. and the wound pierced by the lightning spear had dried up. Not even blood could flow out. If he hadn't eaten an oyster pancake just now, he might not have been able to hold on now. The heaven god tribulation this time was a little more powerful than he had expected. Compared with the shy divine emperor's heaven god tribulation, it was nothing. Rumble, the heaven god in the depths of the thunderclouds, stood tall. He threw out a palm, which rumbled and emitted a terrible fluctuation. The palm sent a chill down everyone's spines. This was a heaven god, a veteran heaven god of the chaotic universe. Even Soul 13 would not have been able to withstand this palm strike. You again. Bufong suddenly raised his head, narrowed his eyes, and said coldly, "That's right, it was that heavenly deity again." The aura of this heavenly deity was something that Bufong would never be able to forget. It was this heaven god who had shattered his god of cooking set with a palm. However, the current him was no longer the same as before. However, Bufong did not understand why this sky god would try to kill him over and over again. Rumble. That palm swept across the stars, causing countless stars to explode. The oppressive aura was so oppressive that the netherworld almost collapsed. Fortunately, Mu Hongzhi intervened and stabilized the netherworld. The attack of a heavenly deity was different from a lightning tribulation. That kind of fluctuation was enough to destroy the world. Could he block it? Everyone's heart tightened. That was a heavenly god. The attack of a heavenly deity carried a sure kill effect. Bufong was covered in wounds, and the recovery speed of his vermilion robe could not keep up with the speed of his injuries. He was like an arrow at the end of its flight, so it was hard to tell how he would fare against the heaven god's palm. Perhaps he would really be obliterated. However, Bufong was not willing to give up. Bufong's heart skipped a beat. Rumble, the god of cooking sets, fell to the ground. This star, which had been deathly still but was now brimming with life, shook violently. Bufong took a deep breath. Looking at the palm coming from the starry sky, Bufong shook his Taotai arm. Yin and yang energy swirled around it, and the 8 trigrams array was spinning in his palm. The black and white Taotais rushed out, roaring at the sky. As Bufong's strength improved, so did the black and white Taotais. After merging with the 8 trigrams array, the power of the Taotai arm became even stronger. Bufong stepped on the star. His fist flashed with dazzling light as he soared into the sky. Facing the heaven god's palm, he punched back fearlessly. Boom! The fist and the palm collided in the starry sky. The thunderclouds seemed to be blown away. The thunderbolt palaces in the sky were connected, but at this moment, they all exploded and scattered all over the ground. Slash! Bufong spurted a mouthful of blood. The yin and yang energy swirled to the extreme, and the 8 trigrams array flashed with dazzling light. The black and white Taotais turned real, biting and tearing at the heaven god's palm. The rumbling sounds of collision caused the heavens and earth to turn silent. Everyone was dumbstruck. Boom! A moment later, the black and white Taotais roared, exploding together with the sky palaces. Bufong's body fell on the star like a cannonball. The star collapsed, creating a deep pit. Bufong's body almost pierced through the star. In the sky, the heavenly deity's arm began to crumble. It continued to crumble until it disappeared like smoke. The heaven god's palm was blocked by Bufong's swoosh. Rubble flew everywhere. Bufong climbed out of the star. His hair was disheveled and his face was covered in dust, but his face was as expressionless as ever. A chaotic saint-level heaven god, Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. After the collision just now, Bufong sensed the power of the heaven god's attack, which was at the level of a chaotic saint. Its aura was stronger than Sueren's. Clearly, it was a veteran chaotic saint. In the face of a chaotic saint, Bufong was still a little weak. Even Bufong, the pride great soul overlord, was almost killed in an instant. Bufong could fight against an ordinary saint of the Great Path, but he had no hope against a chaotic saint. However, the heaven god did not kill him this time. Next time, Bufong would definitely go back and get revenge. There was an old saying that went, "The river flows east for 30 years, and then west for 30 years." Bufong's eyes narrowed. The heaven god was a little surprised that his attack had failed. He had failed the last time, and now he had failed again. He was really surprised. However, since he had failed, the heaven god would not attack again. He had already violated the rules of the universe by attacking again and again, and he would suffer the backlash of the laws. Therefore, the heaven god stopped attacking. In any case, the power that seeped out of his palm was enough to torture that guy for a long time, and it could even completely cripple that mortal. "You're really lucky, but you won't live for long," said the heaven god, standing in the slowly dissipating thundercloud vortex. His voice rang through heaven and earth. There was no doubt that he was talking to Bufong. Bufong looked up expressionlessly. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth. He did not say anything, but just looked indifferently at the heaven god. He watched as the heaven god's figure gradually faded away. The latter seemed to be about to disappear into the thundercloud again and return to the chaos. "No matter what the reason is, if you want to kill me," Bufong sighed. "In any case, I'll remember this. Just you wait. I'll come to you soon." Bufong said. The heaven god sneered. "You'd better resist the erosion of my divine power first. Otherwise, you won't be able to come see me." The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. He gave the heaven god a cold look. Then, without saying a word, he raised his hand and clenched his fist. His middle finger popped out, pointing straight at the sky. "Get lost," Bufong said in a low voice. The heaven god's face turned cold, and he flew into a rage. As a heaven god, the ruler of the chaotic universe, when had he ever suffered such an insult? However, he had no time to do anything else. His body slowly disappeared. The thundercloud in the sky also slowly dispersed. Buzz, the wheel of law, appeared once again, and streaks of energy and light streaks shot down. Those streams of energy fused into Bufong's body and kept healing Bufong's injuries. Bufong sat cross-legged on the star, feeling the baptism of the power of law. His baptism was much purer than that of the Shai Divine Emperor. The Shai Divine Emperor was only baptized by one law, but Bufong was different. Bufong received 5 laws. The 5 laws scoured Bufong's body. The scouring was, in fact, quite damaging to his fleshly body. It felt as if all his bones and flesh were going to be washed away. Strange energy fluctuations spread from Bufong's body. The Shai Divine Emperor and many other top-grade god kings landed. They sat cross-legged on the star that had regained its vitality. Sensing the energy fluctuations spreading from Bufong's body, they closed their eyes. Bufong had gained a lot, but they could also sense the opportunity. The vermilion robe soon returned to its original state. Bufong's wounds also disappeared as the power of law washed over him. Bufong's body seemed to become a little hazy. Behind his head, there seemed to be a 5-colored disc formed by the power of law emerging. Transcending the heaven god tribulation did not necessarily mean that one could become a heaven god. A heaven god was the pinnacle of a chaotic universe, and one's comprehension of power and laws had to be mastered to the extreme. Even the system could not help Bufong break through to the heaven god realm immediately. It took him a long time to comprehend. Bufong sat cross-legged on the star, followed by the other god kings. Many of them had improved their comprehension, and their auras had become stronger. The power of law lingering around Bufong had benefited many of them. Those were the supreme laws of the universe. It was even more difficult for Bufong to comprehend them and become a heaven god. Others only needed to comprehend one law, but he needed to comprehend 5. Of course, without the gourmet array, it would have been really difficult for Bufong to comprehend them. However, with the gourmet array and the 5 artifact spirits, it was not as difficult for Bufong to break through to the heaven god realm as others had imagined. Time passed slowly. Day after day passed. Mu Hongzi and the others also stayed on the planet with lives. They were waiting for Bufong's recovery. Finally, on a certain day, Bufong opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, a 7-colored brilliance appeared in the sky. It was as if a colorful phoenix had flown past, and it was as if a divine dragon had slithered past. All kinds of unusual phenomena emerged in the starry sky. The flowers on the entire planet bloomed and swayed as if they were about to produce a pleasant melody. The other god kings who had been lost in thought woke up and looked respectfully at Bufang. They all looked up at the 5 dots of light that had emerged in the sky. Those 5 light spots were like 5 extremely resplendent divine cores. Those are heaven god causality impositions. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back, his long hair fluttering in the wind. Everyone around him sucked in a cold breath. 5 heaven god causality impositions have all been occupied. How could Bufang achieve his goal? Unless he forcibly removes a heaven god or creates a new causality imposition. Mu Hongzhi heaved a sigh. There were only 5 heaven gods in the chaotic universe, and it could only accommodate 5 heaven gods. What will Bufang do? Mu Hongzhi's eyes rested on Bufang in the distance, lost in thought. The Xiaoyi divine emperor and the others clearly knew the secret of the heaven gods. Solemn expressions appeared on their faces. At this stage, if Bufang failed because of a lack of qualifications, it would be very frustrating. Look, Realm Lord Dit suddenly exclaimed. Some people who were lost in thought paused. The next moment, they looked up at the sky. There, the wheel of law was rumbling, shooting out the power of the law. Apart from that, 4 of the 5 star-like Tao immortals radiated with energy. Accompanied by the power of the law, the energy condensed into a brand new 5-colored causality imposition next to the 5 star-like causality impositions. What's going on? Many people were stunned. Mu Hongzhi's eyes lit up. 4 heaven gods have selflessly given some of their causality impositions energy to help Bufang form his causality imposition. This is breaking the laws of the universe. Why are those 4 heaven gods helping Bufang? However, they could not figure it out, and it was not up to them to figure it out. The moment the causality imposition took shape, Bufang's eyes snapped open. The vermilion bird, the white tiger, the golden dragon, the black turtle, and the qilin, all of them flew around Bufang. Even the gourmet array hovered around him. The causality imposition shone brightly. A 5-colored beam of light fell from it and shot into Bufang's forehead. Slowly, a 5-colored divine crystal formed between Bufang's brows. The crystal vibrated and emanated boundless energy, which gradually made Bufang's aura more profound and supreme. On this day, under the witness of the crowd, Bufang, he had become a heaven god. Chapter 1679. He had become a heaven god. There wasn't anything sensational happening. It was as quiet as a flower blooming. But even if it was a flower, it was a beautiful flower. Bufang opened his eyes. His body was covered in a rosy glow, causing his injuries and aura to instantly recover to a perfect state. His skin had become crystal clear, as tender as a young girl's. His skin made Mu Hongzhi jealous. If he had known that breaking through to the heaven god realm could beautify his skin, he would have given it a try. However, the most excited ones were none other than the Xiaoyi divine emperor and the others. They had witnessed a miracle with their own eyes. The birth of a heaven god had a special meaning to the chaotic universe. What did this mean? It meant that it was not impossible to become a heaven god. Even if one of the 5 causality thrones was already a heaven god, the new heaven god could still find another path and walk his own path. Everyone looked up at the sky. Even though Bufang's causality throne was dim and could not be compared to those veteran heaven gods, Bufang had, after all, carved out a path for himself. He had walked this path, and all he needed to do now was to consolidate it. Countless flowers were blooming where Bufang sat. Trees were swaying, and the spiritual energy in the air was extremely rich. It had only taken him a few days to go from a dead planet to a planet with lives where people could cultivate. This was a planet that gave birth to a heaven god. Putting everything else aside, just the sound of the laws contained in it was enough to benefit countless people. The shy divine emperor's eyes turned red, and so did many god kings. Looking at the planet, all that was left in their hearts was desire. The shy divine emperor had even thought of bringing this planet under his rule. No one can touch it. This planet belongs to the great netherworld. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back and squinted at the shy divine emperor and the others. The shy divine emperor was displeased. The great netherworld also belongs to the shy divine dynasty. So this planet also belongs to the shy divine dynasty. The shy divine emperor's voice was full of vigor. What he said was a fact. He had been wondering where Mu Hongzhi had gone, so it turned out that he had come to this corner. However, what he said was the truth. The shy divine dynasty was vast, and the great netherworld indeed belonged to it. If Mu Hongzhi hadn't killed the emissary sent by the divine emperor to manage the great netherworld, the netherworld would still be under the divine emperor's control. Mu Hongzhi paused. He suddenly realized that he really could not find any reason to refute the divine emperor. This old scoundrel. However, this planet with lives was the closest to the netherworld, so it would be the netherworld that benefited from it. Mu Hongzhi had made up his mind. He planned to move the entire Heaven Chief realm to this planet. This planet had given birth to a heavenly god. Just the will of laws and the aura of the great Tao that the heavenly god had left behind was enough to prove that this planet was extraordinary. In the future, if this star gave birth to life, these life forms would all be extremely intelligent existences. This was the status and significance of a heavenly god. Just the aura he casually exuded was enough to change a part of the world. Bufang was naturally unaware of their quarrel. He closed his eyes and sensed his own aura. The system had upgraded, and many things were different from before. Moreover, Bufang sensed that the restrictions and restraints the system had placed on his cultivation base had completely disappeared. If Bufang wanted to cultivate and make a breakthrough now, it would no longer be a problem of turnover. That was normal. If he could make a breakthrough, as long as he accumulated enough turnover when he reached the level of a heavenly god, that would be too much of a cheat. Bufang's spirit sea had turned into a starry sky. The densely packed stars shone brightly, and each star would provide him with an inexhaustible supply of mental energy. His current mental force was much stronger than when he was in the state of the vast sea. With the 5 artifact spirits guarding the starry sky, together with the gourmet array and the beams of law, Bufang's spirit sea was extremely vast. With just a thought, he could destroy a planet and completely shatter it. He could summon the power of laws at will. This was the power of a heavenly god. Once he spoke, the law would follow. The god of cooking's menu was gone. It seemed to have assimilated with his spirit sea, and all the energy had seeped into it. The true form of his divine sense had also disappeared. However, as long as Bufang wanted to, he could condense it with a thought. In fact, Bufang could even condense the true form of his divine sense from 10,000 miles away, and he could even possess a lot of the fighting strength of his true form. The heavenly god realm was indeed a brand new realm. Perhaps it was because he had just become a heavenly god, but Bufang felt that something was pulling him. It was a very strange feeling. When he closed his eyes, he could see a huge turbid yellow vortex in front of him, spinning as if to draw his soul into it. Bufang's current cultivation base was probably at the peak of the Saint of the Great Path, close to the level of a chaotic saint. He was still some distance away from those real veteran heavenly gods. The heavenly god who attacked him before should be a chaotic saint heavenly god. However, Bufang had just broken through. As long as he was given enough time to recuperate, he would definitely be able to break through to the level of a chaotic saint in the future. After thinking for so long, Bufang rose to his feet. The god of cooking set turned into beams of light and flew into Bufang's body. Behind his head, there was a faintly discernible rainbow-colored halo. It was the symbol of his cultivation base, and it was the manifestation of the laws. All veteran heavenly gods would have such a halo behind their heads. However, Bufong's halo was not obvious because Bufong did not deliberately manifest it. One figure after another descended from the sky. This life star was as beautiful as a fairyland in the mortal world. Flowers bloomed like a brocade, seven-colored and splendid. Bufong glanced around the whole planet. It had absorbed his heavenly god aura and was the place where he became a god. Its significance was extraordinary, and its status had changed. In the future, it would surely become a place that future generations would look up to. "Let's call it the Nirvana planet," said Bufong. Mu Hongzhi descended. Bufong glanced at him. In the past, Bufong could not see through Mu Hongzhi, but now he could roughly sense his cultivation base. He was a little weaker than his current self. However, he still had the cultivation base and fighting prowess of a saint of the Great Path. This was normal. After all, Mu Hongzhi was the previous host, so it was normal for his strongest fighting prowess to be at this level. The Shy Divine Emperor and the others landed as well. They looked excitedly at Bufong. The Shy Divine Emperor even bowed to Bufong. Now, Bufong's identity had completely changed. He had become the supreme heavenly god of this part of the world. "Greetings, heavenly god Bufong." The Shy Divine Emperor was very excited. Behind him were several god kings, who were also looking at Bufong feverishly. Realm Lord Dit, Summer, and other acquaintances landed as well. Bufong nodded. Then, his eyes fell on Realm Lord Dit. At this moment, Dit's body was illusory. This was the body he had condensed, and he had become one with the great path of the Heaven Chief realm. In fact, strictly speaking, he was already dead. Of course, because he was entrusted to the great path, his consciousness was still alive, and he had even gained a lot of strength. Bufong took a deep breath. He raised his hand. A crimson flame emerged. It could now be called the Heaven God Flame. With the 5 supreme laws of the universe fused into it, it emitted a peerless aura. Suddenly, the crimson flame changed, and the law of life took over. A boundless aura of life flowed around it. Bufong casually grabbed a handful of soil from the ground of the planet with lives. He sprinkled it into the flame. The powerful aura of life immediately burned the soil and changed its appearance. The soil kept growing and turning into a human figure. Bufong flicked his finger, and a spark fell into it. Buzz, a brand new physical body appeared. Realm Lord Dit was excited. Bufong was condensing a body for him. Bufong waved his hand, and Realm Lord Dit's will turned and fell into the body. Buzz, the body opened its eyes, and a mighty aura spread out in an instant, accompanied by a terrifying aura of life. Bufong not only helped Realm Lord Dit condense a body, but also helped Dit comprehend the law of life. Now, Realm Lord Dit could cultivate to at least the level of a top-grade God King, and it was not impossible for him to break through to the God Emperor realm. "Thank you, little boo-boo." Realm Lord Dit was extremely excited. Looking at his body, he felt as if he had gotten a new toy. "Your soul has fused with the Great Path. Although this body can't help you separate completely, it is at least your main clone. It can be said that it has given you another life. Even if this body collapses, you won't die because your soul is in the Heaven Chief realm. However, it is inevitable that you will be seriously injured and fall into a deep sleep." Bufong said. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Helping an old friend was something that he did not object to. Then, Bufong copied Boo-Boo-Boo's method and condensed another body. This body was condensed for Hades Tenzang. However, when he took out Hades Tenzang's body, the starry sky changed instantly. A huge black hole appeared, twisting and spinning. It was transmigration. Bufong narrowed his eyes, staring at the black hole. In this transmigration, he felt a familiar aura. "So it's him." Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. The heaven god who had attacked him had an aura very similar to that of the black hole, so they should be of the same origin. If his guess was right, he should be heaven god transmigration. However, Bufong still did not understand why heaven god transmigration tried to kill him again and again. There must be a reason. Hades Tenzang's soul flew out. As soon as he appeared, he was sensed by the transmigration. A thread connected to Tian Song's body entered the transmigration. Like a huge monster, the transmigration opened its mouth and stared at Hades Tenzang. Bufang narrowed his eyes. The crimson flame in his hand began to burn. His aura changed from a flame full of life to a flame full of transmigration. Boom! As the flame burned, the transmigration thread that entangled Hades Tenzang was burned off. Bufang seemed to sense the reincarnation wheel's furious aura. Bufang was fearless. Since Tiansong did not give him face, why should Bufang care about it? He had already given him the middle finger. Why should he care about morality? Holding Hades Tenzang's soul, Bufang stuffed it into the body that had reformed. As the transmigration disappeared, Hades Tenzang had been completely resurrected. Feeling the living body, Hades Tenzang choked with sobs for a moment. He's finally alive. The shy divine emperor and the others were filled with awe and horror. After becoming a heaven god, Bufang's means were truly invincible. He could not believe that he had come back to life from heaven god transmigration. Boo! Heaven god Boo! Where did my son Era go? Hades Tenzang, wrapped in a black robe, asked hopefully as he looked at Bufang. Bufang paused for a moment, then shook his head. He did not know. It's okay. I'll find him and bring him back to see you. He should be very happy that you are resurrected. Bufang said faintly. Hades Tenzang could not say anything, so he just nodded. However, he was still a little worried and concerned. A mother would worry about her son when he traveled 1,000 miles, and so would a father. He did not need Era to have any mighty strength. All he needed was for him to be safe. Then I'll leave it to you, Heaven God, Hades Tenzang said. Bufang had helped him reform his body, and his accumulation was about to burst out. If he returned to seclusion, he could even break through to the God King level in one fell swoop. How could the physical body of a heavenly god be a joke? What about me? I don't ask for much. I just want to make my skin fairer and more tender. Mu Hongzhi blinked his big, beautiful eyes and looked at Bufang. Bufang glanced at Mu Hongzhi and raised his hand. With a wave of his hand, a scarlet-red flame ignited in his palm. No problem. Put your chin on my palm. Come on, don't stand on ceremony. Bufang said faintly. Mu Hongzhi's face froze. He glanced at the flame that was burning so fiercely that it seemed to be able to burn even the void. He hesitated and hesitated. Forget it. I'm the prettiest man in the world. I'm fine now. Mu Hongzhi shook his head. What a joke. Who knows if that chin will be plastic surgery or disfigurement. Oh, by the way, Bufang, now that you are a heaven god, there's something I should tell you. The calamity of the soul demons could not have happened for no reason. There must be a reason why the soul demons appeared. Perhaps the passage between the soul demon universe and the chaotic universe was torn, but I couldn't find it no matter how hard I tried. Now, you should be able to find it, Mu Hongzhi said suddenly, looking at Bufang. This matter was very serious. If he could not find it, the calamity of the soul demons would happen again. Bufang paused for a moment, then he nodded. The shy divine emperor and the others also grew serious. The calamity of the soul demons was a great calamity for them. Bufang moved. With his hands clasped behind him, the colorful light disk behind him flashed. As if stepping on an invisible staircase, he stepped into the starry sky. With his hands clasped behind his back, his mental force surged out. In a flash, it spread out in all directions of the chaotic universe. Buzz, everyone felt an invisible wave enveloping their bodies. The Light Wind Empire, the Abyss, the Heaven Chief Realm, the Shai Divine Dynasty, the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty, the Titan Divine Dynasty, all the divine dynasties were enveloped by Bufang's mental force. His mental force seemed to reach every corner of the universe. Oh! Suddenly, Bufang raised his eyebrows, and a fierce look came into his eyes. Found it. Chapter 1680. Found it. Bufang did not use his innate divine ability, the god of cooking's eye, with his current cultivation base. Once he used it, he could see through the universe with a glance. He just spread his mental force and saw the place where the soul demon had entered the chaotic universe. After the disappearance of his mental force, Bufong's spirit sea became stronger and stronger like a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was as if there was a universe in his mind. Perhaps the other heaven gods were no match for Bufong in terms of mental force. But as Bufong landed on the ground, he did not go over immediately. Mu Hongzhi and the others were looking at him. Bufong should be able to solve this problem now. In fact, what Mu Hongzhi said was not a trivial matter. Soul demons were a disaster for any universe. Their nature was to devour and destroy everything. This was evident from the calamity of the soul demons. After Bufong became a heaven god, he would have to leave the chaotic universe, for there was no heaven god in the chaotic universe. According to the records in the Xiai Divine Dynasty's books, whether it was the ancient heaven god or the modern-day heaven god who comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe, they had all shattered the void and left the chaotic universe. As for where they went, no one knew. If Bufong had left the chaotic universe as well, once the soul demons made a comeback, Mu Hongzhi was probably the only one who could stop them. The appearance of an even more terrifying soul demon or soul overlord would be a complete nightmare for the chaotic universe. Come, let's go and have a look. Bufong clasped his hands behind his back. After becoming a heaven god, his temperament seemed colder, and he looked more majestic. As soon as his voice rang out, Bufong waved his hand casually. Everyone's vision blurred. In the next moment, he discovered that he had appeared in a shattered meteorite ring. The broken meteorites were spinning slowly, densely packed like a forest. They were standing on a flat meteorite. The great spatial teleportation, the Xiai Divine Emperor's heart skipped a beat. What Bufong had just shown was the legendary great spatial teleportation, which was a supreme technique on par with large-scale teleportation arrays. As expected of a heavenly deity, his face was not red, nor was he out of breath after a single major shift. It was the same logic as an ordinary person climbing 20 floors in one go without losing any breath. Everyone shifted their gaze and looked into the distance. Only then did they have the time to pay attention to their surroundings. Where's this place? The spiritual energy is so thin. This must be an abandoned meteorite ring. This is the abandoned land. No living creatures can live here. Many people began to mutter. The people present were all knowledgeable, so they naturally recognized this place. However, as they spoke, their voices suddenly became softer. That was because in the center of the asteroid ring was a pitch-black crack. On the meteorite fragments around the fissure, there was a black ball attached to each meteorite fragment, beating like a heart. Those who had gone through the calamity of the soul demons naturally knew what it was. It's really a soul demon. A god king's face turned pale as he looked at the dense black balls. Just when they thought all the soul demons had been expelled, there were so many soul demon eggs here. What a treacherous soul demon. This place is almost a dead zone for all living beings. Who would have thought that there would be so many soul demons here? A god king said with a lingering fear. If Bufong had not discovered them and allowed them to grow, there might have been another calamity. And this time, without Bufong, could they really survive? TSK. I can't believe they are hiding here. Mu Hongzhi smacked his lips and narrowed his eyes slightly. He had been searching for a long time, wanting to get rid of them in one fell swoop, but he failed to find them. This is a small spatial rift, and the soul demon universe is at the other end of it, Bufong said. This was the first time he had been so close to the soul demon universe. Bufong even had an impulse to go into the soul demon universe through the rift. However, he suppressed the impulse. Now is not the time to go to the soul demon universe. Besides, Bufong did not know what was in the soul demon universe. Although one pride great soul overlord was killed, there were still 6 great soul overlords left, each of whom was at the level of a chaotic saint. Even Bufong did not dare to underestimate them. Not to mention that there was the even more terrifying soul god in the soul demon universe. He did not say anything. Bufong thought for a moment, then suddenly twitched the corner of his mouth. With a flip of his hand, the god of cooking set emerged. The dragon bone kitchen knife, the black turtle constellation wok, and the Chilean transmigration ladle all floated around him. That gave everyone pause. What was Buffon going to do? But looking at his posture, even a fool could tell what he was going to do. He was going to cook. When Buffon took out the ingredients, everyone was stunned. The extremely terrifying pressure and aura made everyone's hair stand on end. Mu Hongxi's pupils constricted. Are these Soul Overlord ingredients? Mu Hongxi looked at Buffon. Where did Buffon get these ingredients? Soul 13? Soul 13's aura was not so terrifying. Yes, what Buffon took out now was the fleshly body of Pride, Great Soul Overlord. It was a chaotic saint-level ingredient. With a spin of the dragon bone kitchen knife, Buffon began to process the ingredients. He peeled the skin and pulled out the tendons. His movements were as smooth as flowing water. As Buffon broke through and became a heaven god, his cooking skills, together with his own understanding, had become more and more profound. Just watching him cook seemed to have a unique meaning of the Great Path. The crowd could not help but feel a little intoxicated as they watched. There were even some godly monarchs who gradually gained some insights as they watched. This was what a heaven god was capable of. His every move could make people think deeply. The corner of Mu Hongxi's mouth twitched. He knew what Buffon was going to do. He was going to discuss the soul demons to the end. Swish, the black turtle constellation wok was opened. Immediately, a dense aura spread out, and there seemed to be a colorful glow swirling around it. The sound of the great path was chanting, and a divine light filled the air. Inside the black turtle constellation wok was a steamed jadeite claw. The skin, tendons, and bones were peeled off, making the paw look like jade-like glass. Buffon shook the wok and stirred it. The sticky sauce exuded a strong aroma. Rumble. As Buffon cooked, the rift in front of them seemed to have changed. Rumble. A horrifying aura spread out. Behind the crack, there seemed to be a huge eyeball emerging. It was filled with ferocity, and just by staring at the crowd, it made them shiver all over. There was no doubt that the existence behind the rift was a terrible existence, no weaker than a modern-day heaven god. You're courting death. A voice rang out from behind the rift. It was very faint, but it was like a thunderclap in the crowd's ears. The shy divine emperor and the others turned pale. Buffon's face remained the same as he watched indifferently. He shook his hand. Then he poured the sauce in the Chilean transmigration ladle into the paw. Sizzle. Clouds rose and bloomed like a colorful glow. The roars of the existence behind the rift grew louder and louder. All the soul demon eggs in the surroundings began to stir. This is the ingredient of the soul demon universe's great soul overlord, Buffon said. With a shake of his hand, the sauce streaked across the sky in an arc immediately. A vast dark cloud came rolling over, with thunder rumbling in it. It was the dish's lightning tribulation. Rumble. A thunderclap rumbled. However, Buffon raised his head and activated the god of cooking's eye. The bright light bursting out of his eyes dispersed the thunderclouds. The crowd was speechless. This tribulation was a little violent. The honey soul dragon paw is done, Buffon said. As his words fell, it was as if his words were law, causing the entire space to tremble. Buffon flicked his finger and tapped the blue and white porcelain plate. The blue and white porcelain plate immediately flew out and instantly shot out. It floated in the middle of the crack and emitted endless rays of light. 5 gourmet arrays wheeled under the plate, suppressing the rift in an instant. The soul overlord behind the rift left in disgust. Suppressing the rift with a dish made by a soul overlord of the soul demon universe. You're trying to disgust every soul demon who wants to reach the chaotic universe through the rift. Mu Hongxi grinned. He liked this kind of simple and crude behavior. Soul demons hated gourmet food, and the meat of a soul overlord was the best ingredient in the world. Buffon's idea was really to his liking. It was a pity that he could not taste such a delicious dish. The glaze-like dragon paw glistened with the luster of the sauce as it hovered there, emanating a rich aroma that intoxicated everyone. Boom, boom, boom. The soul demon eggs that were clinging to the meteorites exploded one after another. Then, one soul demon after another flew out of the meteorites, roaring and swooping toward the crowd. Bufang glanced at them. Then he snapped his fingers. Click! A crisp sound rang out. The crowd was shocked. Then, they found that as the soul demons approached them, they gradually disappeared. Rumble, a wave of energy spread from the dish in a rift. Immediately, the darkness that had enveloped the meteorites was swept away. On each meteorite, there seemed to be a small tree swaying and rising. The meteorite forest, which had gone from dead silence to full of the aura of life, had turned into a land of enlightenment. Everyone marveled and was once again shocked by the means of a heaven god. Well, the threat of the soul demons has been lifted. Unless the soul god intervenes, even a great soul overlord will not break this rift. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Then he waved his hand. Using the great void teleportation, he brought the crowd away. This place, on the other hand, seemed to have become a blooming flower in the boundless starry sky. It swayed quietly. When they returned to Nirvana, the shy divine emperor and the others had returned. However, after they returned, they sent the most talented geniuses of the divine dynasty to Nirvana. This planet was the place where a heaven god had reached the great path, and these geniuses could improve their talent and cultivation base here. For a moment, Nirvana was bustling with activity. Bufang stayed on Nirvana for a long time. He was settling down. Year after year passed. A city was built on Nirvana's star, and a country was established. The population gradually increased, and all kinds of geniuses rose like mushrooms after a spring rain. Mu Hongzi really moved the Heaven Chief realm here, while he took Summer to various parts of the chaotic universe to enjoy himself. Hades Tenzang went to Nirvana and became the city lord. This was the place where Bufang reached the great path. He was waiting for Bufang here. If Bufang returned with Hades' era, he would be able to find him soon. Bufang also stayed on Nirvana. However, few people knew where he was. He opened a small restaurant in a city on the Nirvana planet. This was an extremely simple and unadorned restaurant. He was consolidating his cultivation base while running his business. Although the restaurant's revenue could no longer improve his cultivation base, he enjoyed it. After all, he was still a chef. Early in the morning, the sky had just brightened. Bufang pushed open the door of the wooden hut. He rolled up his sleeves, carried a wooden barrel, and walked to the well in front of the hut. He threw the barrel down. Splash! The barrel fell into the well. With a splash, it sank into the well. Bufang slowly pulled it up, the half-filled barrel swaying in the wind. Then he stepped into the hut with the barrel in hand, ready to start the day's cooking. He poured the water into the jar. Suddenly, Bufang paused, raised his eyebrows, and unleashed his mental force. In an instant, it enveloped heaven and earth. In a flash, it was as if he had crossed the universe. The next moment, Bufang found a voice calling him. However, the person who called him slightly surprised him. Hades' era? Chapter 1681. Hades' era? Bufang blinked. He was sure he didn't hear it wrong. That voice was indeed Hades' era's voice. However, it sounded distant and indistinct. Bufang blinked. He didn't expect that Hades' era would call him. He was going to look for him in a few days. He didn't expect that Hades' era would call him, which saved him a lot of trouble. After wiping the porcelain bowl in his hand, Bufang packed his things. "Xiao Bai, let's go out for a ride." The corners of Bufang's mouth rose as he said indifferently. Then he clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the restaurant. Xiao Bai's eyes flashed as he followed Bufang. When they walked out of the wooden restaurant, Xiao Bai closed the door behind him. After Bufang broke through to the heavenly god realm, Xiao Bai also changed. However, Bufang didn't notice these changes for the time being. However, Bufang could feel one thing. Xiao Bai's aura had become much more independent. It wasn't like before when he was restrained by the system. Today, Xiao Bai was like an independent life form. Compared to the dull Xiao Bai before, he was more intelligent. To Xiao Bai, this should be a good change. Xiao Bai's appearance didn't change much. He was still fat as he walked behind Bufang. Little Hu and Xiaopi were lying on Bufang's shoulders. Xiaopi was sleeping soundly, as if he was wrapped in a cocoon. As for Little Hu, he had grown fatter. Apparently, he had been eating well recently. Boom! Bufang brought Xiao Bai out of nirvana, walking slowly in the starry sky. However, although it was slow, with every step he took, the stars behind him flowed away. Hades' Era's voice had already disappeared from Bufang's mind. However, the position of the shout had already been locked by Bufang, so Bufang only needed to look for it according to the position. Hades' Era had disappeared ever since Bufang had returned. Bufang had no idea where he had gone. But now, it seemed that Hades' Era had gone out to have fun. After all, the universe was so big. It was normal for him to want to go out and take a look. This direction, Bufang was speeding along with Xiao Bai when he suddenly fell silent, because he felt that this direction seemed to have some sort of knack. The immortal spirit Divine Dynasty. Bufang descended with Xiao Bai and hovered over the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang's vermilion robe flapped noisily. As soon as they landed, several figures flew over from the direction of the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty. Xiao Yinyu looked at Bufang in surprise. She didn't expect that Bufang would come to the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty. As the empress of the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty, she had too many things to do, so she didn't have much time to greet Bufang. Bufang also had a complicated expression on his face towards Xiao Yinyu, his old friend. Xiao Yinyu invited Bufang into the Divine Temple, and they walked while talking. IMO followed respectfully behind Xiao Yinyu, not daring to breathe loudly. She looked at Bufang, who was walking in front of her, with a complicated expression on her face. The chef she didn't think highly of had grown to a level where she didn't dare to look at him. Following behind Bufang, Xiao Bai glanced at IMO with its mechanical eyes flashing. IMO felt a chill run down her spine when the puppet glanced at her. Sure enough, everything around a heaven god was extraordinary. Xiao Yinyu had wanted to invite Bufang to a banquet, but Bufang refused. Bufang chatted with Xiao Yinyu. They talked about the past and the things that happened in the Light Wind Empire. Occasionally, when the conversation came to something interesting, Xiao Yinyu would cover her mouth and smile. Her every frown and smile was indeed very beautiful. Of course, they also talked about many acquaintances in the Light Wind Empire. Unfortunately for them, who had reached this level today, many people had already gone with the wind, just like the past. Bufang chatted with Xiao Yinyu for a while. Then he stood up. He told Xiao Yinyu the purpose of his trip. Oh, Owner Bu wants to go to the ancient heaven god's relic? Xiao Yinyu was taken aback. She didn't expect that Bufang would make such a request. Every divine dynasty had an ancient heaven god's relic, and so did the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty. However, for Bufang at his current level, it was meaningless for him to go there. Bufang just twitched the corner of his mouth and said that he had sensed an old friend's cry for help in there. Xiao Yinyu didn't take it lightly and ordered IMO to make the arrangements. However, Bufang just waved his hand, took Whitey, and disappeared from where he was. For the current Bufang, Xiao Bai could teleport with just a thought. Xiao Yinyu's face stiffened. Her red lips parted slightly, and she exhaled. Xiao Yinyu's expression stiffened. Her red lips parted, and she let out a breath. Xiao Bai and Bufang were indeed not at the same level now. Pass the order that I'm going into seclusion, Xiao Yinyu said after a long silence. Xiao Yinyu was silent for a long time. There seemed to be determination in her tone. She had comprehended 4 supreme laws of the universe and was extremely talented. She was the only one who could keep up with Bufang's pace. She would also work hard to catch up. In the relic of an ancient heaven god in the immortal spirit Divine Dynasty, Bu Fong had been to the relic of an ancient heaven god in the Xiai divine dynasty. At that time, it had become a playground for soul demons. But now, the calamity of the soul demons was over. Bu Fong walked in the relic, which was somewhat strange. The sky was blood red. The ground was black. The style was somewhat bizarre. Xiaobai followed behind Bu Fong. His feet seemed to sink deep into the soil. It was a strange feeling. Xiaobai didn't care. Every time he lifted his foot, he seemed to pull up dirt. Bu Fong took one step at a time, neither too fast nor too slow. This was where Hades' era's cry for help came from. Bu Fong followed the footsteps and searched for the source of the sound. The source of the sound came from the depths of the relic. Bu Fong and Whitey walked over. There were very few people in this ancient heaven god's relic. What they saw was a ground full of bones. These were the bones of god kings. They crossed the mountains, crossed the blood-red lake, and stepped on the swamp. Finally, Bu Fong found Hades' era on a hillside in the distance. Looking at Hades' era's familiar figure, Bu Fong froze for a moment. He found that he couldn't recognize Hades' era anymore. The playful Hades' era had lost his innocence and romance. At this moment, he was kneeling on the ground, his face covered with unkempt hair. His arms were sunken as if they were weighed down by 1,000 kilograms, so heavy that he could not lift them. In Hades' era, Bu Fong felt a strong sorrow and heartache. This emotion, how could it appear in this prodigal son? Thinking of Hades' era, who laughed and called him young man, Bu Fong frowned. Tap, tap, tap. Bu Fong didn't fly, but walked along the hillside step by step. Near the hillside, there was a plain. Along the hillside, there were footprints. The footprints were stained with blood from the blood. Bu Fong sensed a sense of despair and sorrow. It seemed quite tragic. Whitey stomped on the ground, and with a boom, the ground caved in. The footprint immediately disappeared. Xiao Bai's body stiffened, like a child who had done something bad. He scratched his round head, and his mechanical eyes flickered. Bu Fong's mouth twitched, as if he was chuckling. Stay here. I'll go up and take a look, Bu Fong said. After that, he walked toward the figure kneeling on the hillside with his hands behind his back. Xiao Bai patted his chest with his fan-like palm and sat on the ground. He looked up at the sky. Bu Fong walked toward Hades' era with his hands behind his back. He flipped his hand. A spicy strip entwined with spiritual energy suddenly appeared. Hades' era knelt on the ground. He looked quite miserable. Bu Fong handed him the spicy strip. Nether King Ha raised his head, looking at Bu Fong with an incomparably aged face. His eyes were bloodshot and bloodshot. You're here, Hades' era said. He opened his mouth. His voice stunned Bu Fong. The vicissitudes of life and the bone-chilling coldness made Bu Fong frown. Was this still Hades' era? What on earth had he gone through to become like this? Hades' era glanced at the spicy strip in Bu Fong's hand. He hesitated for a while, but didn't take it. It was mainly because he couldn't lift his hand. Bu Fong took out an oyster pancake and fed it to Hades' era. Gulp. After eating the oyster pancake, Hades' era coughed out a mouthful of blood. The terrifying power of the law was rampaging around the wound. Your wound. Bu Fong's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and placed it on Hades' era's arms that he couldn't lift. Boom. Bu Fong seemed to feel a pair of eyes that seemed to have opened from the ancient times and was staring at him. Heavenly God's power? Bu Fong frowned. The divine power in him surged and swept out with rumbling sounds. The heavenly God's power was like a chain that wrapped around Hades' era's body, constantly destroying Hades' era's body. At this moment, the life force in Era's body was almost depleted. One should know that Hades' era had comprehended the law of life. Although the heavenly God's power was strong, it still shattered under the impact of Bu Fong's divine power. Hades' era's arms were restored, but the vicissitudes of his body didn't fade. It was a spiritual wound that Bu Fong didn't have the ability to heal. Bu Fong sat next to Hades' era. After eating the oyster pancake, Hades' era's condition was much better. At least, he didn't look so wretched. He handed a spicy strip to Hades' Era. Bufong took a spicy strip and put it in the corner of his mouth. What happened? Tell me. It's rare to see you in such despair. Nether King Erha also held the spicy strip in his mouth, sucking it deeply. It was still a familiar taste that moved him. I've resurrected your father for you. I'll go see him when I have time, said Bufong. Hades' Era's body shivered. After a while, he said, thank you. His words of thanks were somehow heavy and grateful. Bufong raised his eyebrows in surprise. What happened to you? Why is there a heaven god's power in your body, tormenting you? Asked Bufong. Hades' Era held the spicy strip with 2 fingers. He took a deep breath, and he looked much more vicissitudes. What is love in the world? It's the thing that makes people live and die together. Hades' Era sighed. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. He glanced at Hades' Era. Speak human language. Hades' Era rolled his eyes at Bufong. You blockhead, what do you know? Huh? Bufong's mouth twitched with a fake smile. Hades' Era didn't pay attention to Bufong's sneer. He seemed to be lost in his memories. His face revealed a gentle and happy smile. That smile made Bufong's hair stand on end. Bufong could guess that this guy had done something terrible. Do you want to listen to my story? Hades' Era smiled. He sucked the spicy strip in his mouth and looked at Bufong. Bufong's face was expressionless. His hand shook. A jar of divine wine appeared. He poured himself a cup, took a sip, and looked at Era. You have a story, and I have wine. It's just right. Tell me. Hades' Era looked at Bufong and smiled happily. It was good to have someone to listen to his story. After you and Lorgo left, I started to travel the universe. Then I met a girl. At the foot of the hill, Xiaobai was also listening attentively. Bufong took a sip of wine. It seemed to be a beautiful love story. I'll omit 1,000 words about you and me, Bufong. Era exhaled, and his eyes became sad. Finally, she told me that she was the daughter of God, and she came out to travel the world. And then, Bufong's spirit was instantly lifted. Hades' Era looked at Bufong sadly. What is love in the world? It makes people want to live and die together. Bufong's mouth twitched. Speak human language. Hades' Era pursed his lips. Then, I slept with her. Bufong, God appeared and took her away. He wanted to take my people away. I tried to stop him, but I was beaten and seriously injured without any resistance. Hades' Era exhaled. Bufong's mouth twitched. This story was really exciting. You dare to sleep with God's daughter. No wonder you're Hades' Tenzang's son. You're lucky you didn't die, Bufong said. No, that god slapped me from the chaos, and it was a fatal blow. I don't know why I didn't die. Hades' Era's eyes were deep and full of vicissitudes. Maybe it's because I'm handsome. Bufong rolled his eyes. Who is that heaven god? There are only a few heaven gods in this world who can do that, Bufong asked. Nether King Erha exhaled, his eyes bursting with an unyielding look. I know. He calls himself Heaven God Transmigration. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.